Chapter 1622. Within the Crimson Continent, Zhang Yan was still deep in thought as he deduced for an extremely long period of time. Every single time he encountered a difficulty, he would try to solve it himself, and only when he encountered questions that he couldn't answer would he emerge from his meditative state and head to the founding ancestors' abode to read the secret book. Fu Qingming was right about one thing: everyone's path towards the Tao was different. So, he merely used it as a reference and didn't blindly copy it. Sometimes, he would even question it and ask a rhetorical question. This was like a question and answer session between master and disciple, and it allowed him to gain even more comprehension and gains every single time. He ceaselessly went back and forth between the Crimson Continent and the founding ancestors' abode, but the Yukuan had never had any intention to speak. Even though the Yukuan had promised Fu Qingming, the truth was that so long as Zhang Yan didn't take the initiative to speak to it, then it would be unable to enter the abode. So, it couldn't be considered to have gone back on its word. Zhang Yan didn't take the initiative to ask as well, but he had some sort of feeling in his heart that something might have changed in the outside world, and perhaps he didn't have much time left to cultivate. However, he was very clearly aware that if he didn't succeed in his cultivation, then it would be useless even if he left the abode, whereas if he succeeded, then all problems could be easily solved. So, he didn't get distracted by this, and he continued deducing the cultivation technique step by step. Because he'd immersed his entire mind into it, he didn't notice the passage of time at all. One day, his mind awoke from his long period of comprehension. At this moment, he'd finally deduced the path of the Tao beneath his feet to the limits of his ability, and when he counted the time, he noticed that over 400 years had actually passed. Presently, a day in the outside world was around 320 days in the damaged jade. During these 400-plus years, it was equivalent to 129,600 years in the damaged jade, and not a single year was more or less. He clearly sensed that even if he continued working hard, he wouldn't be able to obtain any more in this area. At this point in time, he'd already made sufficient preparations. The path towards the higher realms was right beneath his feet, and he could take that step at any time. He wasn't too impatient, and he just sat silently here for a few days to harmonize his vital energy and mind. After that, he stopped hesitating and focused his gaze, causing the dark stone to appear out of thin air before him. He stretched out his hand and grabbed it, and then he didn't hesitate to circulate the cultivation technique. At this moment, images of the future suddenly flashed before his eyes. The boundless evil aura was surging towards him, as if it wanted to stop him from taking this path. It seemed like it wouldn't take long. It might take a few hundred years, or even a few decades for it to reach him. However, right at this moment, Crimson Continent seemed to have turned upside down, and countless indescribable things surged out from within it. It was like a torrent had surged into an ocean, and it was unable to cause any ripples. All the evil energy that shot over was worn down and devoured. It wasn't just that, it was gradually spreading towards the source, and it arrived at the end where even he was unable to see. All of these scenes flashed in an instant, but he understood in his heart that so long as he was still here, then this future would be equivalent to being killed by Qi Lu. Such a thing would never happen, but if he left, then the resentment would come looking for him. This was good news. It meant that he could focus all of his attention on breaking through the trial, and he didn't have to divert part of his energy to guard against external disturbances. Thus, he turned his divine will and instantly escaped into the unknown. At the same time, the profound stone also disappeared from the present world and appeared in this place. This place seemed like a void origin sea, and there were countless dimensions in the surroundings that revolved ceaselessly around him. There was no past or future here, nor was there any beginning or end here. He only knew that he existed here. As he circulated his cultivation technique, a myriad of paths instantly unfolded before his eyes, and every single one of them seemed to lead to the end. He was even able to notice that one of them was exceptionally flat. This was the path that Fu Qingming had pointed out for him. He only had to step onto it, and because he had the experience of his predecessors as a reference, he would be able to pass through it very smoothly. He didn't use such a shortcut, and he took another path after taking a glance. However, it was also because of this that layer upon layer of obstructions instantly appeared before him, and they ceaselessly tried to push him away from the correct path. If he were to accidentally fall into one of these obstructions, then he would be lost within it forever, and he would never be able to come out again. Fortunately, he'd seen such scenes many times within the damaged jade, so he was able to pass through this door with ease. After taking a step, he didn't go down immediately. Instead, he withdrew his divine decree, and it was also at this instant that due to the effect of the internal refinement technique, the results obtained from the divine decree instantly reflected into the avatar. In just a moment, the avatar suddenly became stronger. Such a situation was as if the process was cut off, and the cause of the matter was born, and there was a direct result. The avatar, on the other hand, benefited from this, and it would become even stronger. Subsequently, it would be able to produce even more primordial chi to support the consumption of the divine decree. Therefore, the more difficulties it passed, the stronger the avatar would be, and conversely, it would be able to push its cultivation to a step further. After his chi activity had completely stabilized, he gathered his thoughts and continued to circulate his cultivation technique within the divine decree. In the next moment, another wave of primordial chi poured in and continued to replenish the avatar. After that, he circulated his divine decree again, and this cycle repeated. When he was deducing earlier, he managed to find all the difficulties that he could encounter, and he resolved them. He grasped every step extremely precisely. Therefore, there was no need for him to think carefully, and he could proceed to the next step without any pauses. Since the ancient times until now, all the cultivators that had arrived at this barrier, no matter if they succeeded or failed, there wasn't a single one that was able to achieve such an almost perfect state like him. If his cultivation was successful, then perhaps he would be able to attain an unprecedented state. However, he didn't let his guard down because of this. The Tao of true yang was profound and unfathomable. Even if he deduced it over and over again within the damaged jade, he was unable to say that he'd exhausted everything and knew all the changes. Because no matter how much time passed within the divine decree, it would only be an instant in the eyes of the outside world. So in the eyes of the outside world, his vital energy was rising ceaselessly, and his primordial energy was rising ceaselessly as if it could continue until the end of the world. After continuing like this for over 100 years, he finally stopped because he'd already arrived before the final door. Based on Fu Qingming's memories, so long as he was able to pass through it successfully, then he would be able to attain the upper stage of the true Yang realm in a single step. But this was the most difficult barrier. If one didn't possess an enormous amount of primordial chi and sufficiently formidable primordial energy, then one could only be obstructed by this final door. Even though he'd repeatedly deduced it within the damaged jade, he wasn't able to pass through it every single time. The vital energy of a cultivator was in the state of dispersing at all times, and if one was unable to maintain an upward momentum, then one could only go downhill. This was like a wave that had suddenly surged, and once the peak of the wave passed, it would surely fall downwards. After experiencing the external refinement and internal refinement before this, coupled with the infusion of the dark stone and the reflection of the primordial energy, it was equivalent to pushing this wave of primordial energy up ceaselessly. Only when his vital energy rose to the highest point would he have a chance to break through the door. This move seemed to be simple, yet it required him to circulate his cultivation technique ceaselessly, and there were countless indescribable forces obstructing him. These forces were impossible to grasp and had no fixed rules, so it was utterly difficult to grasp, and he could only act according to the situation. This door would exhaust all his previous accumulations in one go, and it could be said that all his hard work in the past was for the sake of this step. If he couldn't pass through it, then it would be impossible for him to pass through it in the future. He didn't know what would happen in the future because every single time he failed, his mind would withdraw from the damaged jade, and he would be utterly unable to recall everything. It seemed as if that part of the future would vanish along with it. This pass was life, but also death. He looked at the door, and his mind suddenly became extremely focused, and his cultivation technique circulated faster and faster. At this moment, he could no longer distinguish whether he was in the divine will, or in the present world, or both. Just at the moment when his vital energy reached the peak, he suddenly slammed his body forward without the slightest hesitation. Boom! As if everything had shattered, the door was no longer there, and in front of him was a vast and endless sea of primordial energy. This was absolutely different from what he saw after he severed his future body. This was a true sea of primordial energy, which spread throughout the heavens and worlds, hidden deep in the dark. It did not pass through the past, the future, and not in the present world, and only the divine will could touch it. According to Fu Qingming's memories, so long as a cultivator planted his vital energy into this world, he would be able to endlessly absorb primordial energy from it in the future, and it would become resources for a true yang cultivator. The deeper he planted his vital energy, the more benefits he would obtain, but at the same time, the greater the pressure he would have to bear. All of this depended on the cultivator's own foundation, vital energy, and even vital energy. After observing it for a while, he placed his vital energy into it. At first, it was extremely easy, but the further he went, the greater the pressure. Before long, it became extremely difficult, and his vital energy and magic power were rapidly flowing away. It felt as if he was carrying the entire sea of primordial energy, and as his vital energy went deeper, it became heavier and heavier. However, he remained unmoved and continued to go down. After an unknown period of time, he finally felt that he'd reached his limit, and if he were to forcefully continue, then it would probably harm his foundation. However, right at this moment, his body that was already dried up suddenly shook, and countless indescribable things surged into his body. At this moment, on the Scarlet Continent, even if he did not deliberately guide it, once his vital energy were exhausted, these things would continuously pour into his body and maintain his vitality. Whether it was the profound stone or the void primordial sea, it was only his Dharma body that had strengthened, not his physical body. However, this did not mean that the physical body was useless. The two were originally one, and there was no difference between them. They could still be used by him. As a result, the already exhausted essence qi increased a little more. For him at this moment, this was only a drop in the bucket. However, this stopped his momentum from declining. Instead, he went a little deeper into the sea of essence qi where it should have been impossible. But it was precisely this step that caused an extreme change. Bang! He felt as if he'd entered into a completely new world, and a wave of comprehension instantly surged in his heart because he'd crossed a barrier that no one had ever crossed before. At this moment, a dot of light shone on the sea of primordial energy, and it instantly spread infinitely far away. When the sun first appeared, all transformations were born. He smiled faintly, and his Dharma body suddenly dispersed, turning into specks of light that fell down until they disappeared. After a long time, they once again gathered in the boundless light, and he returned to his original appearance. With this change, the world had been turned upside down. On the Scarlet Continent, Zhang Yan opened his eyes, and two divine lights that seemed to be able to illuminate the entire world flashed. He shook his sleeves, stood up quietly, and looked around. In an instant, he saw all the worlds, the past and the future. At this moment, his gaze suddenly became incomparably distant, and he chanted in a clear voice, "The primordial sea uses the boat to ferry the true spirit, creation as the furnace to refine the Dharma body, a single breath connects all the worlds, and the universe is in harmony with the profound God." Chapter 1623. After Zhang Yan finished muttering to himself, he went to look into the divine will. He discovered that the profound stone had already completely disappeared at some point in time, and he could no longer find any traces of it. He had a feeling that the karma between him and this object had been temporarily severed. However, there would be a day when they would meet again in the future. He smiled and did not delve too deeply into it. He had promised Fu Qingming in advance that he would protect him and help him become a Tao god after he became a true yang cultivator. However, with a glance, he knew that although the situation in the Yuhuan All Heavens was tense, it was far from collapsing. Come to think of it, with his current magic power, even if these worlds were all occupied by outsiders, he could still return them to their original forms. That was why he didn't head there immediately. Instead, he carefully examined his magic power and divine abilities. After entering the true yang stage, he could feel as if everything in the world was revolving around him. This could be called the inversion of heaven and man. It was the heaven and earth responding to him, not him responding to the heaven and earth. He could feel that his chi activity had spread to the primordial sea of the void at that moment, and it was stored in various worlds. Some of them were worlds that he had been to before, and some he had never seen before. Once a cultivator entered the true yang realm, his chi activity would flow with the vital chi sea, and the void realm that he could reach could be called the tribe constellation. The place where Fu Qingming's chi activity originally reached was called the Yu Luo tribe, and the Yu Huan heavens was only one of them. After it was defeated, a wisp of its essence chi could only stay here, and it could no longer exert any influence on other places. Moreover, because of the evil chi, its chi activity was still shrinking. Zhang Yan, on the other hand, was different. Ever since a dot of true yang appeared, his dharmakaya had been continuously expanding, so the area covered by his chi activity continued to expand. These void spaces were actually not clustered in one place, but were scattered everywhere, just like the countless islands on the vast ocean. However, it was meaningless to him at this moment, because as long as his own chi activity could reach it, there was no difference in distance. With just a thought, he could send his doppelgangers into it, and with a turn of his divine will, he could decide its rise and fall. True yang cultivators were both in the future and in the past, so no matter which direction they were attacked from, it was impossible to completely kill them. Even if the shadow of the future and the past were all destroyed, it would only destroy an incarnation that was reflected in the present world. As long as the yang fire on the primordial sea was not extinguished, it would be reborn. In a sense, it was already untouchable by all techniques and difficult to be destroyed by all tribulations. Only those of the same generation could influence each other. As Zhang Yan thought about this, he couldn't help but think of Fu Qingming's opponent, who was also a true yang cultivator. If he acted as Fu Qingming's protector, he might have to fight with him. However, there was also a high chance that this person would stop. From Fu Qingming's memories, true yang cultivators would avoid each other as much as possible in order to avoid clashing with each other's auras. There was no need to deliberately do this. Normally, every true yang cultivator would try to distance themselves from each other. This was like everyone choosing to walk in a different direction, and after that, they would walk further and further away. The higher one's magical power was, the further away they would be from their peers, and the less likely it was for them to have a conflict. After he sorted out his thoughts, with a thought, a shadow clone had already descended into the remnant heavens. Now, his real dharmakaya could only land in the spirit will primordial sea, in the connate dark world, and could not easily go to other realms. It was not that he couldn't, but once he went to a certain place, he would definitely devour the spiritual vigor of heaven and earth there. It would no longer affect all living beings, but the void of the world. In just an instant, he appeared in the land of darkness. Fu Qingming had already noticed his arrival. He looked at him and was slightly surprised. Then, he stood up and solemnly bowed, "Congratulations on attaining the upper state." Zhang Yan smiled and returned the bow, saying, "I still have to thank Palace Master Fu." Fu Qingming shook his head and said, "You're too kind, fellow Taoist. I'm just fulfilling the promise I made with your founding master." As he spoke, he sighed and said, "I originally thought that no matter how fast you are, you would need at least 700 to 800 years to achieve something. I didn't expect that you would succeed in just 500 years. Zhang Yan said with a smile, "I came back here to thank Palace Master Fu and to help my founding master end the karma of the past." Fu Qingming bowed again to express his gratitude. He said seriously, "It's just that there's an extremely important matter that I couldn't tell you earlier. Now that fellow Taoist has succeeded, I have no choice but to tell you." Zhang Yan nodded. For Fu Qingming to be so serious, it must not be a small matter. It might be related to his enemy. He turned his head and cast a glance at a certain place, saying, "Yu Huan is currently unstable. I'll first deal with the chaos here before talking to Palace Master Fu in detail." As he spoke, he gently waved his sleeve at Yu Huan, as if erasing something. Within the Yuhuan heavens, after more than 500 years of hard work, the cultivators of spirit heaven had already occupied the heart melody, belief illusion, striking stone, vermilion pillar, and long he heavens. They had also pushed down the imperial decree golden hall in the inner realm, sealed the world ring, and abolished the merit system. However, due to the lack of manpower, they had already reached their limit and could no longer occupy any more territories. They needed to consolidate for a period of time and implant the divine qi of the cultivators who couldn't leave in time to make it for their own use. Just now, they could occupy more territories, but this was not something that could be done in one go. Every time they did it, it would take dozens or even hundreds of years. Elder Chu had already expected this. He thought that it would take thousands of years to completely conquer Yuhuan. This was not an exaggeration at all. According to the current progress, it would indeed take that long. Inside the spiritual boat, Elder Chu was calling the cultivators to discuss what to do next. Suddenly, a jade talisman flew in from outside. He reached out to receive it, and his expression turned serious. He said, "It's a letter from the Lord." He hurriedly ordered people to place it on the table, and after bowing a few times, he opened it. After reading through it, he revealed a pleasantly surprised expression, and he raised his head and said loudly, "Everyone, good news. The evil lord has been suppressed by his lordship, and his lordship is currently refining his body. Once he succeeds, he will immediately lead us to sweep through the various worlds, and even the Green Jade Palace Master will be unable to stop us." When everyone heard this, their faces lit up with joy. They had previously heard that this evil monarch was originally one with their lord, but for some unknown reason, they were separated. If they could fuse as one, suppressing Yuhuan would be a piece of cake. However, at this moment, a clear stream of air suddenly swept past. Following it, everyone in the hall seemed to have stopped moving. Then, one by one, they shattered like glass and completely collapsed in the hall. Everyone, including Elder Chu and Liang Jinglong, had a smile on their faces even when they died, completely unaware of what had just happened. At this moment, it wasn't just here. In the other four heavens that the cultivators of Bingling Heaven had conquered, the same scene was playing out. In the Azure Flower Heaven, Elder Peng was cultivating, but at this moment, the jade seal beside him suddenly trembled. He felt like something was wrong and immediately took it out to take a look. He saw a flash of light and then disappear. His thoughts turned and he thought to himself, this item was personally refined by the palace master and is a spiritual item. Could it be that it's trying to warn me now that it's suddenly acting strangely? Now that the realm ring had been sealed, the spies he had left in the inner realm had never sent back any news, so it was difficult for him to know what had happened. Every time Bingling Heaven attacked, it would try to hide the heaven's secrets. He was afraid that Bingling Heaven was preparing to attack again, so he didn't dare to be careless. He called a disciple over and said, "Go to the various heavens and tell everyone to be careful. If there is anything strange, come and report to me." The disciple bowed and left to carry out the order. Elder Peng took a look at the jade seal and put it away. At this moment, someone reported that Feng Lan wanted to see him, so he immediately said, "Invite him in." After a short while, Feng Lan strode into the hall. After paying his respects, he sat down and said solemnly, "Elder, just now, someone came to report that the myriad emptiness ring has appeared in the 5 realms that were occupied by the combined spirit heaven. It seems that we can go back and forth again." Elder Peng's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't help but feel that this had something to do with the jade seal. The attendant said, "Is it possible that it was done by the people of Bingling Heaven? Or did something happen in Bingling Heaven that made them unable to seal the realm gate?" Elder Peng pondered for a moment before replying, "That is a possibility. However, if this is truly the work of someone from heaven merging spirit, then they must be up to something big. We must first understand the situation inside." He paused for a moment before saying to one of His Highness' trusted disciples, "Go and find a few people to investigate. If something is wrong, quickly return." The disciple bowed and said, "I will arrange the people right away." After waiting for a long time, a spiritual light flashed and a letter flew into the hall from outside. The attendant went forward and grabbed it. When he opened it, he couldn't help but be startled. He looked up and said, "Elder, the disciples have sent a message. All the people of Bingling Heaven have disappeared without a trace." Elder Peng was startled and frowned. "Did you find out?" The attendant checked the talisman and said, "There is no mistake in the letter." Elder Peng changed his mind and said in a deep voice, "Send someone to investigate again." At this moment, Feng Lan stood up and asked, "Elder, with the methods of Bingling Heaven, the disciples can't see anything. Why don't I go and take a look myself?" Elder Peng thought for a moment and nodded. "Be careful." Feng Lan agreed and went out in a ray of clear light. After more than 2 hours, he turned back. As soon as he appeared, he said loudly, "Elder, the letter is not false. Within the 5 realms, all the cultivators of Bingling Heaven have disappeared. There are no traces of them escaping through the void, and their palaces are all left in place. Not a single thing was taken away. This person seems to have disappeared without a trace in an instant." All the cultivators in the hall were startled when they heard this. They found it hard to believe. One must know that there were tens of thousands of cultivators invading Bingling Heaven this time, and there were many almighty cultivators of enlightenment. How could they just disappear like that? Feng Lan's expression was slightly excited. He took a step forward and said, "Elder, is it possible that the palace master has taken action?" Elder Peng knew some secrets and it was difficult for him to make a judgment. However, when it came to the 10,000 empty ring, other than almighty cultivators like the palace master of the Green Jade Palace, he couldn't think of anyone else who could do this. However, when he thought about this, his heart trembled, as if he had thought of something. Chapter 1624. In the Green Jade Palace, although Elder Peng had a vague guess, he couldn't be sure, so he couldn't say it out loud. He couldn't help but ponder over it. Everyone in the hall saw that he was deep in thought, but didn't dare to disturb him. They were all waiting for his next order. After pondering for a long time, Elder Peng raised his head and said, "You wait here, I'll be back soon." He stood up and went to the back of the hall. He took out a jade talisman and circulated his mana. After a short while, he saw the talisman glowing. He knew that he had received a response, so he couldn't help but reveal a happy expression. He raised his hand and pushed. The green jade wall in front of him retreated, revealing a jade staircase that led to the depths. He stepped up and squeezed through the billowing smoke. Not long after, he came to the end of the jade door. The door was wide open, and a black-haired Taoist in a long robe was sitting there. He hurriedly went forward and bowed. "Greetings, enlightened Dugu. I, Peng Xinhu, have come to ask you about something." Dugu Heng smiled. "Elder Peng, I know why you're here. Just now, Master has sent me a message. The cultivators of Ling Tian have been eliminated, and the war has ended. You can send people to reclaim the seized world and restore the good deeds method." Hearing this, Elder Peng straightened his body and said with surprise and joy, "Did Palace Master really take action?" Dugu Heng smiled and shook his head. "It wasn't Master, but another High Holiness." "Another High Holiness?" Elder Peng thought for a while and nodded silently. He didn't ask any more questions. Dugu Heng said, "You've come at the right time. I have something to tell you as well. Now that the crisis has been resolved, I think my master will leave soon. I don't know when he will return, and I will be reincarnated again. Green Jade Palace will be under your control for a period of time, and I will also need you to protect the method of karma points." Elder Peng bowed solemnly. Disciple understands. However, he hesitated for a while and said, "Disciple would like to ask enlightened Dugu something. Although the cultivators of Ling Tian are dead, they were ordered by someone who calls himself a divine emperor. Rumor has it that he's somewhat related to the evil demon. If he comes, do you have any way to stop him?" Dugu Heng smiled. "That High Holiness has an agreement with Master. Before Master returns, he will take care of Ling Tian. You don't have to worry about that." Hearing this, Elder Peng Xinhu bowed again. "Master, High Master, Peng Xinhu said with a smile. Master, thank you for your explanation. In the land of the dark underworld, Zhang Yan had wiped out all the cultivators of the twin spirit sky with a wave of his sleeve, as if he had done something insignificant. Fu Qingming didn't take it to heart. In front of a true Yang great cultivator, ordinary cultivators were as insignificant as a speck of dust. Even with his remaining essence qi, if he were to go all out, he could easily wipe out all living beings in the world. However, when he saw that Zhang Yan didn't do anything to him, he thought that Zhang Yan was letting him go on purpose. He wanted the person behind him to retreat. This was understandable. Between high holiness, unless there was something they couldn't avoid, they would try to avoid fighting. With Zhang Yan's current strength, if he didn't know how to deal with that wisp of qi, he could destroy it with a flip of his palm. Zhang Yan knew what he was thinking. He smiled and said, "Please wait for a moment. Someone will deal with that wisp of qi." Fu Qingming was surprised. However, he thought about it again and guessed a possibility. He couldn't help but look surprised. In the sky beyond heaven, two balls of obscure qi were constantly rolling, and it could be seen that there were two strange faces fighting with each other. One was half bird and half human, and the other was shaped like a ghost. However, the half-bird and half-human thing seemed to have the absolute upper hand, while the other ghost face was struggling and howling incessantly, looking like it was about to be defeated. Not long after, as the half-bird, half-human creature continued to attack, the ghostly face finally could not hold on any longer. It slowly dissipated with an unwilling cry, and then the two balls of qi gradually fused. In the end, it turned into a middle-aged Taoist wearing a gray robe with his hair tied up in a high bun. As soon as he appeared, he was enlightened and immediately knew his true identity. He recited, half aware and half aware of the hidden scheme. "Today I know the truth." He thought in his heart. So I was originally formed from a strand of that person's vital energy, and it's only because of my obsession that I've been locked in battle with the Palace Master of Jade Palace until now. In this way, there seems to be no need for me to continue fighting him. He knew that if he really forced the Palace Master of Green Jade Palace to show up, he might not be defeated, but it would be easy for the original to find out his whereabouts. With the original's temperament, to prevent him from becoming stronger in the future, it was very likely that the original would kill him. He was also selfish. It was fine if he didn't know about this. Now that he knew, he naturally didn't want to provoke the Palace Master of Green Jade Palace. However, he didn't want to return the territories that he had taken from the Yuhuan Heavens. Not only that, he wanted to take more territories. He thought that as long as he didn't take more than half of the territories, it was still within the range of the Palace Master of Green Jade Palace. There's no time to lose. Now that my cultivation has improved greatly, it's time to go back. As long as I hide carefully, I might be able to turn the tables in the future. After making up his mind, he was about to land on Yuhuan's body, but just as he was about to move, he was startled. He raised his head and looked over, instantly looking at the 5 realms, and discovered that within his senses, there was actually no longer a single cultivator from the Heavenly Spirit sect. He still didn't dare to believe it. He looked over again. After looking back and forth a few times, his senses were still blank. This time, the cultivators that attacked the Yuhuan Heavens had indeed disappeared. He couldn't help but reveal a shocked and angry expression. This was obviously the interference of a powerful person. No matter how he looked at it, no one in the Yuhuan Heavens could do this except for the Palace Master of Green Jade Palace. He couldn't help but grit his teeth and said, "I originally wanted to take a step back. Since that's the case, don't blame me. Wait until I kill all the cultivators of the Yuhuan Heavens. Let's see how your method of karma points can survive in the world." From his point of view, once the Palace Master of Green Jade Palace made a move, the real body would definitely be discovered. Then, there was no point for him to continue hiding. With a thought, he was about to escape into the world. However, at this moment, he suddenly felt something. He turned his head and saw a white-robed Taoist approaching from the void. He was dignified and handsome, and there was a sense of indifference and loftiness between his brows. In his hand, he held a magic sword that shone brightly. He could feel that the person approaching was not simple, and it was difficult to see through him. He couldn't help but reveal a wary expression and shouted, "Who are you, sir?" The white-robed Taoist glanced at him indifferently, then stepped forward. In an instant, he was in front of him. He waved his sword and slashed. After a flash of light, he calmly sheathed his sword and silently bowed to the Yuhuan heavens. Then, he flicked his sleeves and turned to leave. The gray-robed Taoist that was formed by the evil qi stood there, and his expression was still the same. However, at the next moment, his entire body suddenly collapsed into a ball of unstable qi dynamic. The white-robed Taoist did not take away his life force. He had only wiped out his obsession and spirit with one strike of his sword. There was no longer any sense of self left in him. Without these, he was just a ball of slightly stronger qi activity. Unless there was a day when his spirituality could be reborn, he would not be able to pose a threat to anyone. But even if there was such a day, he would be another person. When Fu Qingming saw this scene, he couldn't help but look at Zhang Yan and said, "Is that the doppelganger that you created when you achieved success?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Yes." Fu Qingming sighed and said, "Since you can make the doppelganger and yourself be of one mind, it means that there are very few distracting thoughts during the process of achieving success. It's almost like there are no distracting thoughts. That's why you obtained such good fortune." Although he didn't know how many doppelgangers Zhang Yan could create, as long as there was one that could reach this level, it would be extremely difficult. In the past, Fu Qingming had created dozens of doppelgangers, and one of them had the magical power he had now. However, the doppelganger wanted to become independent and wanted to replace Fu Qingming. Later, Fu Qingming found and killed the doppelganger. As far as he knew, there were very few people like Zhang Yan, whose doppelgangers could listen to the instructions of the original. At this moment, Zhang Yan said, "This matter is over. I wonder what Palace Master Fu wants to teach me." Fu Qingming's expression turned serious and said slowly, "I was about to tell you." He paused for a moment and then said in a deep voice, "If I'm not wrong, the place where you used to cultivate should be in a world in the primordial sea of void?" Zhang Yan nodded. Fu Qingming continued, "However, I'm afraid you don't know. Above the primordial sea, there is a place called Bushutian. It is the ancestral continent of myriad worlds, the source of the universe. It is difficult to describe with words. If the primordial sea of void is the ocean, then it is the continent on the shore. The world we look at is just a drop in the ocean. If you want to take a step forward in the future, you can only go there to find opportunities." Zhang Yan's heart skipped a beat. In truth, when he became a true yang cultivator, he could faintly sense a vast and mysterious place, but he didn't know where it was. Now that he thought about it, it should be Bushutian. Fu Qingming continued, "This world is indescribably mysterious. Even if you're skilled enough to enter this place, you'll still be able to talk to mortals. Is there a limit to my cultivation?" Zhang Yan asked. Fu Qingming smiled. "That is not the case. If you have the opportunity to go there, you will know." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. Fu Qingming continued, "Everything in Busu Tian is flourishing, and it can be said to be inexhaustible. Even mortals don't have to worry about food and clothing, and there are all kinds of external objects for cultivation. For example, the mysterious stone that fellow Taoist used to achieve success was brought from that place by your sect's founding master. This stone's original name is Zhou Huan Yuan Jade, and it's formed from Busu Tian's heaven's essence qi. It has always been rare and hard to come by. If any cultivator wishes to achieve true yang, they can't do without this item." At this point, his tone became slightly emotional. "This piece of Yuan Jade that your sect's founding master left behind was brought from Busu Tian, but I'm afraid it's the last piece." Zhang Yan was surprised. "What do you mean? Could it be that Bushutian can no longer form this item?" Fu Qingming shook his head and said, "I used to live here, but we encountered a great change later on. All the cultivators left to avoid the calamity, but when we returned, we discovered that this world had already been taken over by ordinary Khanate demons. These demons were originally not on good terms with us cultivators, but after they enjoyed all the treasures of creation, their abilities became even greater, and they kept us outside, unable to enter. If we can't return to this place, I believe that no one else in this world will be able to reach the true Yang realm after you, fellow Taoist. Chapter 1625. Zhang Yan smiled instead when he heard this, and he said in an indifferent manner, the changes of the heaven Tao and fortuitous encounters are never things that can be stopped by the strength of man. Even if it could be stopped, one should have transcended it a long time ago. Why would there be a need to do something like this? In I's opinion, the predecessors have their own destinies, and the future generations will have their own fate. There is no need to worry about this. There were countless variables in the future, and even with his current realm, he did not dare to say that he had everything under control. This palace head Fu's conclusion was a little too pessimistic and premature. Who knew what would happen in tens of thousands of years, or even millions of years? However, this was just a theory, and there was no need to take it too seriously. Fu Qingming nodded and said, fellow Taoists' words are reasonable. Who can predict the changes of the future? In fact, if fellow Taoist does not have other thoughts, there is indeed no need to be too concerned. At my cultivation level, as long as you do not provoke your peers, those Xiantian demons will not dare to come looking for you. Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, Palace head Fu just now mentioned that there are cultivators trying to take back Busu Tian. Are there still cultivators doing this? Fu Qingming thought for a while and sighed. Although they say they are taking it back, they are only barely resisting. It is said that Busu Tian is constantly sending out great demons, and it seems that their intention is to kill all the cultivators who have gone out. Those demons have Busu Tian as their backing, and they have all kinds of cultivation medicine. Moreover, if the Zhou Yuan Jade is born again, it will only fall into their hands. As time goes on, it will only help them grow stronger, and our human Tao will become weaker. Zhang Yan narrowed his eyes. If this was really the case, and the demons continued to grow stronger, then a clash was inevitable. Although the other party might not be able to do anything to him, he might not be able to protect his disciples either. He said, Palace head Fu's injury, is it related to this? Fu Qingming hesitated for a while and said with uncertainty, perhaps so. After I lost my main body, there were some things that I knew before, but I can't remember them clearly now. I only remember that there is an enemy that I need to avoid. At this point, he sighed and said, fellow Taoist, you might not believe me, but if you ask me how to kill a true Yang cultivator, I won't be able to give you an answer because I really can't think of how to do it. That's why I'm still puzzled by this encounter. Because he was only a strand of essence, there were some important matters that he could not carry with him. Some of them were purposely left outside to avoid alerting his opponents, so he could not explain. Zhang Yan thought for a moment and said, Busu Tian is the ancestral continent and also a land of creation, so there should be upper realm Granjin there. As you said, those innate demons don't dare to provoke us, so their cultivation should not be too far from us. So, where did those great existences go? Why didn't they attack? Do they have other places to stay, or do they not want to pay attention? Fu Qingming shook his head slowly and said, I won't hide it from fellow Taoist. Actually, ever since I started cultivating the Tao, I've never seen a cultivator above true Yang. I've only heard some specious rumors, and it's the same for my fellow Taoists as well. I've even once doubted whether such a great expert exists. Naturally, this might be because I'm lacking in knowledge and it's difficult for me to keep a secret. If fellow Taoist has the chance in the future, there's no harm in going over and looking into it. Zhang Yan was surprised to hear this and asked, then what about my ancestral master? He had probed it just now, but even now, he still could not sense the depth of the ancestral master great underworld's cultivation, and he could not communicate with the aura that was left behind. It could be seen that the ancestral master's cultivation was far above his. However, Fu Qingming gave him an unexpected answer. He asked in astonishment, who is your esteemed sect's founding master? Have I seen him before? Zhang Yan's eyes flickered and he looked at Fu Qingming. After a while, he said, has Palace Lord Fu forgotten the origin of the mystic stone? Fu Qingming smiled and said, how could I forget? That was something that I obtained with great difficulty in the past. I've always been waiting for a fated person, and I never expected that fellow Taoist would come. This is my fortune. Zhang Yan's brows raised. He asked a few more questions, and he realized that he'd actually completely forgotten everything about the great underworld founding ancestor. After all, the two of them had just mentioned this founding ancestor earlier, and only 100 breaths of time had passed, yet he'd actually completely forgotten about it. But now, the mystic stone had a different origin, as if it had been replaced by another story. If a person with a weak Tao heart was standing here, they might think that this was an illusion. Zhang Yan thought for a moment and looked at Fu Qingming carefully for a moment. He found that Fu Qingming's aura was a little less than just now. This was not a natural loss, but it seemed to have been shaved off by something. There were two possibilities. One was that just now wasn't what he wanted to say, but someone else had entrusted it to Fu Qingming so that Fu Qingming could pass it on to him, but he forgot it after it was done. The other was that Fu Qingming did it himself, but he didn't know what purpose it had. Both were possible, but judging from the past, he leaned towards the former. Then the person who did it was very likely the great underworld ancestral master. As for why the ancestral master did this and what his purpose was, he didn't want to guess. Without that level of cultivation, it was useless to think too much. Perhaps the ancestral master did it unintentionally. If he really wanted to know, he might as well ask Yu Kuaning Zhao. After all, he had followed the ancestral master and might know more. At this moment, Fu Qingming counted with his fingers and said, the external disturbance has been eliminated, and the timing is also suitable. I'll leave a few more instructions to my disciple before going to reincarnate. Fellow Taoist, please wait here for a while. Zhang Yan said, Palace Master Fu, please do as you wish. Fu Qingming sent his thoughts out. After a long time, he came back to his senses and said, thank you for waiting, fellow Taoist. Zhang Yan smiled and said, it's fine. Fu Qingming sighed and said, this reincarnation is incomplete because of the qi dynamic. When I return, I'm afraid I will look different. I thank you in advance. Zhang Yan didn't mention the karma of the ancestral master anymore and said, Palace Master Fu, you don't need to thank me. Since we have an agreement, I will protect this heaven for you. Fu Qingming thought for a moment and said, I have left some old books in Green Jade Palace that recorded some miscellaneous things in Bushu Heaven. If fellow Taoist is interested, you can take a look at them. After that, he solemnly bowed to Zhang Yan and sat down. After a while, his qi dynamic gradually decreased. At the same time, the Dharmakaya also disappeared little by little. In Zhang Yan's eyes, the side of Fu Qingming was slowly disappearing from the world. If it was compared to a trace left in the world, then this trace was gradually fading at this moment until it finally disappeared. There seemed to be some changes in the Yuhuan heaven. Just as he said, perhaps after coming out, he would no longer look the same. After a cultivator reincarnated, if he was awakened by a true yang mighty figure, he could still realize his former self. However, Fu Qingming's method was completely different. Zhang Yan stood with his sleeves behind his back. Although he looked indifferent, he was vigilant. If someone wanted to ruin this result, then this would be the right time to take action. After more than 100 days, Fu Qingming's Dharmakaya had completely disappeared. In the land of chaos, only Zhang Yan stood there quietly. Until now, there were still no external enemies. It might be possible that the other party didn't know what Fu Qingming was doing here, but it was difficult for him not to notice that his evil thoughts had been destroyed. The most likely reason was that he knew that there was a peer here, and he didn't want to or simply didn't dare to clash with Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan changed his mind. This was also good. He had enough time to cultivate. He felt that there were many things that Fu Qingming had said just now, and there were even some contradictions, so he couldn't be sure which was what the great underworld patriarch wanted to tell him, and which was what Fu Qingming said himself. However, he would know what the truth was after he went to take a look. Perhaps someone would come looking for him first, so there was no need to get entangled in this. Moreover, he had just now become a true yang, so there was no need to be so anxious. Before Fu Qingming became a Tao god, he also needed to resist here, so he couldn't leave this place easily. He closed his eyes and sensed for a moment. Then, he waved his hand, and a jade slip appeared in his hand. This was the record of Bushutian that Fu Qingming had mentioned. However, when he took a look at it, he discovered that it was completely blank, as if all the content had been erased. He pondered for a moment, but he didn't throw it away. Instead, he put it away, and with a thought, a wisp of shadow was already projected outside of Xianhong heaven. He sensed the formation, but he was still unable to see through it. He could only sense that the formation was on the verge of dispersing and would not be able to last much longer. However, with his current ability, even without the formation, he would still be able to maintain the stability of the world. The Jade Kun in Gue was originally wandering outside, but when it sensed the movement here, it turned around. After feeling the deep and bottomless aura from Zhang Yan, it immediately revealed a look of incomparable joy and said, "Shangzhen has reached the upper true yang realm?" Zhang Yan nodded with a smile and said, "That's right, I still have to thank fellow Ing Zhao for your help." Ing Gue said, "Gue is just waiting here according to the patriarch's orders." When Zhang Yan saw it, he wanted to ask some questions, but at this moment, he suddenly had a feeling that if he really asked it, it would definitely cause some things to happen, and he couldn't be sure if it would be good or bad. So, he pondered for a moment and didn't do that. After saying a few words, with a thought, he directly appeared in the room where the secret booklet was placed earlier. He looked up and saw that there were many more jade slips here. What was especially eye-catching was that more than half of them were still empty. If it wasn't for the fact that they weren't for decoration, then he couldn't see them at his current realm. He nodded with a smile. Cultivators weren't afraid of knowing too little, but they were afraid of not being able to move forward. If there really was a secret book, then it was good news. He stepped forward and reached out to pick up a jade scroll. Just now, his gaze fell on it, and he felt a mysterious consciousness floating in front of him. Chapter 1626. Zhang Yan stood in the hall, slowly comprehending everything that appeared in the jade slip. The records left here were about where to go after becoming a true yang cultivator, but there was no specific cultivation method in it. The cultivation of a true yang cultivator could be called the path of the heart. As long as one was in a place where one's qi was spread, one's thoughts could be reflected in the world. Simply put, it was like the ability of mortals to have their wishes come true. For example, the evil monster from before had this ability. However, it was only a wisp of qi, and it could only affect mortals and some low-level cultivators. True experts did not have such restrictions. So on the surface, as long as there was enough qi, a true yang cultivator could do almost anything. Because of this, from this point onwards, there seemed to be no fixed rules and no path to climb. From the jade slip, only by seeing through the obstacles and seeing the heavenly Tao could one use great benefits and make the void see oneself. However, this was only a general explanation of the Tao, pointing out the next step. As for how to do it, there was no detailed explanation, so one could only rely on one's own comprehension. Zhang Yan could see that no matter how one cultivated, the foundation was still qi. Although he had the sea of qi to rely on and did not need to worry about a lack of resources, from this point of view, he could only maintain his current cultivation. If he wanted to improve his cultivation and climb to the higher realms, just relying on this was probably not enough. The opportunity should be outside, not inside. Fu Qingming once said that if he wanted to have such a desire, he needed to be in Busu Tian, but if he did so, he would inevitably clash with those Xiantian demons. He pondered for a moment, but did not rush to a conclusion. Instead, he turned his head and took a look. Then he walked to the other side and flipped through the jade slip. When this scroll entered his hand, he could not help but raise his eyebrows. This was also related to cultivation methods, but it described the many consequences of cultivation going astray. A true yang cultivator could make everything turn according to their heart. It could be imagined that in this realm for a long time, most people would lose their reverence for heaven and earth. However, in this way, distracting thoughts would arise frequently. Every once in a while, there would be vital energy that would gain intelligence and appear in the world. Most of them were evil and filthy, and they acted in an unbridled manner. If it was within one's own territory, no one would care even if they brought endless calamities to their subordinates. However, if they offended one of their own, it would not be so easy to deal with. In fact, it might even lead to a war between the two sides. Seeing this, Yang Kai couldn't help nodding. It was no wonder that Fu Qingming had repeatedly warned him that he had to have the right thoughts when breaking through to the true Yang realm. Since this matter was mentioned in the Jade Slip, there must be a solution. He withdrew his thoughts and continued to read. According to what was written, these doppelgangers were born from the cultivator's chi machine. If all the karma and calamities were planted in the outside world, then in the end, it would more or less implicate the main body. At first, it would not feel much, but later on, it would accumulate more and more, and this generation's cultivation would also become higher and higher. Therefore, it must be killed in time. However, killing the chi machine avatars was still not enough. This would not solve the problem from the root. Therefore, there was only one way, and that was to cut off all thoughts and desires and step onto the heartless path. In this way, not a single thought existed, not a single thought, and completely cut off the source of the external manifestation of chi machine. He would only do things that were in line with his own interests. Zhang Yan thought about it. This was somewhat similar to killing one's mortal heart in the paradise. It could even be said to be of the same origin, but it was done in a more extreme manner. This could be said to be a hidden danger that had been left behind on the path of cultivation. Unless he destroyed it and started over, it could not be truly eradicated. He did not want to walk this path. Firstly, he had walked every step to the extreme, and when breaking through to the true Yang realm, there were almost no distracting thoughts. Even if he only had one avatar, it had to agree with the main body, just like a teacher to a junior, so there was no such problem. Secondly, it seemed that the emotion-severing method had solved all the problems, and there was no need to worry about being involved in unnecessary karma. However, the purpose of cultivation was to seek transcendence. If he even abandoned all his emotions, he would not be considered as his original self. Even if he achieved the Tao, he would at most be a puppet under the great Tao. He shook his head. Seeing that there were other discussions below, he skipped this section and continued reading. The other solution mentioned here was to make use of the avatars and make them work for the main body. Furthermore, he could provoke the avatars to fight with each other. In this way, he could control the situation within a tolerable range, and he would not need to walk the heartless path anymore. It was a good idea, but it was actually not easy to do it. No mistakes were allowed in the process, and there might even be problems that one could not imagine. The most realistic thing was that if he encountered an external enemy in the process, or if the enemy used this against him, then internal and external troubles would come at him at the same time. If he did not handle it well, he might be destroyed. In comparison, it was not unreasonable to choose the heartless path, because it would solve the problem once and for all. Zhang Yan smiled. Even though there were many drawbacks to this technique, there were gains and losses. As for which one was better, it was difficult to judge unless one personally experienced it. The various obstacles that one might encounter were all left behind, and the records were very detailed. If there was no accident, it should be the experience and comprehension left behind by someone of the same generation in the past. Since it was recorded here, it should be related to the great underworld ancestral master or his disciples. However, after sensing for a while, he could not find any trace of its existence. Logically speaking, as long as there were traces left behind by a true Yang cultivator, if it was seen by another true Yang cultivator, then there would definitely be a connection between the two. Unless the person's power was so great that he could not see through it, it would mean that the person was already dead. He did not think that this person had climbed to a higher realm. When he looked at this method, he did not have the same feeling as when he came into contact with the ancestral master's aura. Moreover, The method of such a great expert should not easily appear here, but should have been raised high up. He looked at the jade slip again and sighed in his heart. Mortal metamorphosis cultivators could still search for their past through searching the divine will, but true yang cultivators themselves were above the past and the future. What the world could see was only a part of them. Once they died, even if they could find some traces of their past, it would be meaningless because there was no way to trace them back to their original body. So whether this person died because there was something wrong with his method, or because he encountered some other trouble, there was no way to verify it now. At the end of this record, there were a few ways to deal with the incarnations of distracting thoughts, but they were all similar. In short, the greatest enemy that a true yang cultivator had to face was themselves, and their peers were ranked second. After he read all of them, although he still did not know where the right path was, these were after all the experiences of the predecessors. After knowing some of the drawbacks, he could avoid them in the future. He placed down the jade slip in his hand and allowed it to vanish before taking a step forward and arriving before another cave. He took another jade slip, and when he saw it, he couldn't help but feel refreshed. This place was finally related to how to comprehend the profound Tao and improve one's cultivation. Just like before, there was no method of cultivation. It only mentioned how to find the path forward. When he looked at it one by one of the ideas caught his attention. The person who proposed it believed that the order of the great Tao was nothing more than to observe the heavens and comprehend oneself. It could create a world, move external methods into it, observe the changes of all things, the mysteries of the world, the reflection of the inside and the outside, and find that thread of operation. If a true yang cultivator wanted to create a world, it would no longer be a small world. It would be no different from a world created by creation. Everything in this world, from the smallest things to the smallest things, such as the sun, moon, and stars, would need to be evolved by a single force. Zhang Yan felt that this was very interesting. With his current cultivation, the act of opening a world was not difficult. Moreover, if he could create living beings, he would not be able to comprehend the wonderful Tao from them. When this person's cultivation reached a certain level, he could still listen to them, so it was very worth a try. Right now, this small world is useless to me, but after this matter is over, I can open another world and create all things. In addition to this method, there was actually another practical method, and that was to discuss the Tao with people of the same Tao. However, this was not easy to do. True yang cultivators would avoid each other, and from Fu Qingming's memories, since the creation of the universe, there were not many people who had reached this level of cultivation, so it was even more difficult to find them, unless there was a relationship between them. He raised his head, but he could not help but think of the previous sect masters of the Qinsang school who had ascended from the 9 continents. He did not know where these seniors had gone, and he did not know if there were still true yang cultivators under the great underworld patriarch. Speaking of which, he could now observe the 9 continents and find the place where the patriarchs of the 9 continents had ascended to. However, every time he thought about this, there seemed to be an indescribable feeling in his heart, as if telling him that the time was not right. Therefore, after thinking about it, he did not do it, and only waited for fate to arrive in the future. After staying in this cave for a day, he had almost looked through most of the jade slips that had appeared. There was only one place that he hadn't touched. The cave niche there was extremely narrow, and there was only half a jade slip left. It was extremely inconspicuous, unlike the other places that were dazzling and enshrouded by dense qi. Even so, he could still feel that the things recorded within were extremely extraordinary. Therefore, when he saw it earlier, he did not go forward to flip through it, and instead left it at the end. The order in which he flipped through the secret booklet was not random, but followed a mysterious feeling in the dark. Of course, it was also possible that everything he could see had already been arranged, and no matter what he chose, the result would be the same. When these two were put together, it seemed to be somewhat contradictory, but in fact, it was not. Because the choice was still made by him in the end, and if he did not move, then there would be no result. He stretched out his hand and took out the half-incomplete jade slip, and his eyes couldn't help but flicker slightly when he looked at it. Because what was mentioned here was actually the method to kill one's peers. Chapter 1627. Zhang Yan didn't think that he would be able to find such a method here, so he couldn't help but look down. A true yang cultivator had a sea of yuan qi to rely on, so as long as the yang fire wasn't extinguished, it didn't matter how many times you killed them. Fu Qingming also said that he didn't know how he was defeated. It wasn't that he didn't remember, but that he couldn't imagine how to kill someone of the same generation. The distance between true yang cultivators was extremely far. The so-called distance here actually meant that they were separated in different spaces. From the moment they became true yang cultivators, it was like two people walking in different directions with their backs facing each other. Without any external influence, it would be impossible for them to cross paths. According to the Jade Slip, if one wanted to kill someone of the same generation, they first had to calculate their location, then find a way to get close, and finally cut off the source of their yuan qi. It sounded simple, but the price one had to pay was enormous. If two true yang cultivators were to fight, if they didn't both have the intention to kill the other, then one of them would be able to escape, and the other would have to spend far more yuan qi than the other. The longer the process, the more yuan qi would be used up, and if there was even the slightest mistake, all of the previous efforts would be wasted. Without a strong enough foundation, it was likely that before they could kill someone of the same generation, they would first collapse. In fact, there were no words in the Jade Slip, but after his consciousness went through it, he naturally comprehended the method to calculate the location of a fellow true yang cultivator. At the same time, he also learned one thing: as long as he could comprehend this method, it proved that there were true yang cultivators in this world that he could kill. And if there came a day when this method was no longer useful to him, or if he could no longer understand it, it would mean that he would no longer be able to defeat anyone of the same generation. He couldn't help but chuckle. This was clearly karma. If it was someone else who knew about this, it was very likely that they would be trapped here, forming a mental barrier that would instead restrict themselves. However, he didn't take it to heart. The heavenly Tao was constant, and strength wasn't fixed. The weak could become strong, and the strong could become weak. Nothing was immutable. Those who obtained this method didn't need to be complacent because they understood its mysteries, nor did they need to tremble because they couldn't identify the method. At the end of the day, this was just a technique. There were so many secret techniques in the world, if it didn't match, he could just change to another one. The lifespan of a true yang was endless. As long as he had enough patience, he would be able to wait. However, this did not mean that this technique was worthless. There was always a difference between having it and not having it. At the very least, he would be able to roughly judge his own strength at any time. At the same time, he could sense that the purpose of the person who left behind this technique was not to instigate a battle between true yang cultivators, nor was it purely to kill his peers. Instead, it was to give ordinary people a chance to achieve Tao. No matter how outstanding an ordinary cultivator's natural talent was, as long as the place they cultivated was under the control of a true yang cultivator, then without any external influence, they would never be able to surpass this true yang cultivator. This was because everything that was disadvantageous to them would be turned into advantages. Under such circumstances, even if it was unconsciously, that cultivator would still die halfway. Therefore, the existence of a true yang cultivator had already cut off the path of countless people. This was also an invisible karma, unless this person was willing to take the initiative to restrain his power. When Zhang Yan thought up to here, he suddenly had a flash of inspiration, and he faintly grasped the key. No matter how he looked at it, his main opponent now was himself, and ceaselessly subduing his own body might be the gateway to the upper realm. However, just now, he immediately stopped thinking about it and didn't delve deeper. Because with his current ability, once he was certain, his understanding would immediately turn into reality. At that time, even if it wasn't a bottleneck, it would become a bottleneck. This was especially true for the current him. He was simply too powerful, and it would not be easy for him to defeat himself. Before he was completely sure of his future path, he did not want to immediately step onto this path. He needed to accumulate more experience and make more preparations. However, now that he had obtained this technique, he could track down the whereabouts of his peers. Previously, the the source of the evil aura was the Xiantian demon, so he didn't want to come into contact with it so soon. Now that he had another target, he could try to make a move. He turned his gaze towards the direction of the smoke world. At this moment, he could see clearly that it wasn't a true yang expert. It was just a spiritual manifestation. Otherwise, it was impossible for the Junchen realm cultivators to move their realm out. In fact, they wouldn't even have the thought of moving their realm. But even if it was just an incarnation, cultivators below the true yang realm wouldn't be able to resist it. If it was allowed to exist, it would eventually become a problem. If he could capture it, he could try to track down its whereabouts. Now that the Junchen world was considered a lower realm of the mountain and sea realm, he naturally couldn't allow outsiders to touch it. Although he hadn't made a move yet, his intentions were clear. To a true yang cultivator, this was enough of a reason to attack. And after this matter was resolved, he could make a trip back to the 9 provinces. At this moment, he realized that while he was thinking, the remnant slip in his hand had disappeared. When he raised his head and looked around, the place was empty once again. After thinking for a while, he took out a tortoise shell. This was something he had obtained in Yihaitian in the past. He could borrow it to go to the Patriarch's cave. When he went there previously, because his cultivation realm wasn't high enough, he didn't go deep and had retreated. Now that he thought about it, since this was where the Patriarch sealed the place, he might be able to gain something if he went there again. With a single thought, he appeared outside Yihaitian's cave in the next moment. He tossed the tortoise shell into the air, and as a ray of light shot out, he arrived within the seal and returned to the place where he had exited from the last time. He looked over and saw that the corpses of the great demons were still there. However, as his gaze swept over them, they all disintegrated and disappeared. The remnant divine wills were like drifting clouds in the face of a gale, disintegrating like ice. Seeing this scene, he fell into deep thought. This place should have something to do with the great underworld Patriarch's arrangements, but the Patriarch was able to place the corpses of the monsters here. It showed that the divine ability was able to restrain at will. Regardless of whether this was the key to advancing further, if he couldn't restrain and release it at will, even if he was covered in Whaley, it would be useless. He would have to pay more attention to this in the future. In the blink of an eye, he had already arrived inside a cave. However, when he looked around, an indescribable feeling arose in his heart. Even if he had come here last time, he probably wouldn't have been able to see this place. He smiled and pondered, I hope I won't return empty-handed this time. With a wave of his sleeve, he stepped inside. Yuhuan Heavens, in front of the Yin God's spiritual cave. Elder Peng led the elders and disciples of the Green Jade Palace to this place. A secret hall elder came to the front and handed a golden talisman to him. He said solemnly, the talisman passed by the palace lord is here. Please accept it, Hall Master. Elder Peng's expression also became serious. He raised both hands and received the talisman carefully. As long as the talisman was removed, the Yin God's spiritual cave would no longer exist, and the land of Turbidine would return to its original place. There was a hint of worry in Guan Longzhao's eyes, and he asked, Elder Peng, are we really going to do this? Elder Peng Daoren said, even though this place has been repeatedly cleared several times, with so much turbid qi and spiritual opportunity gathered in one place, there will only be more and more demons. In the end, it won't be able to suppress them. How long will it last? It's better to let it return to its original place. At this moment, Feng Lan said, Elder Peng is right. Although there will be some damage in the short term, it's still bearable. Moreover, there won't be any demons that we can't deal with anymore. In the long run, it's a good thing. Guan Longzhao sighed and said, but if we do that, the cultivators of the various worlds will suffer. Elder Peng said in a deep voice, now that the demons have been eliminated, we have no more enemies. It's not appropriate for us to continue like this for a long time. A disciple at the side said, Elder, isn't it a good thing to have no enemies? Elder Peng shook his head and said, once the enemies are gone, there will be internal troubles. Without the pressure of life and death, except for a few, the cultivators of the various worlds will definitely hesitate to move forward. One day, if a great enemy really comes to invade, how will we be able to stop them? But with these demons as opponents, it won't be like this anymore. He also wanted to cultivate in peace and didn't need to waste his energy doing these things, but this was impossible. After talking with Duge Hang, he learned some more secrets and understood that this world was far from as stable as he thought it was before. Especially since there were many empty realms in the Yuhuan Heaven realm, it was hard to say when a tyrannical enemy would come. Although there was still an exalted holiness protecting them, that exalted holiness was not a member of the Green Jade Palace and could not stay here forever. Moreover, that exalted holiness would only help Yuhuan and the All Heavens fend off the Almighties of the same generation, and would not take care of everything. If they encountered enemies from the outer realm like Liang Jinglong, they could only rely on themselves. He slowly picked up the golden talisman, and was not in a hurry to move it. Instead, he asked, "Is everything ready?" Although this was not the first time he had asked, Feng Lan still replied seriously, "Elder, all the heavens have already arranged their people. There won't be any mistakes. What's more, now that the method of karma points has been spread to the rest of the world, all the people of the heavens have the book of karma points. Even if they encounter danger, it won't be difficult to escape." A few months ago, there seemed to be some changes in the Yuhuan heavens. Now, even if they were not in the Golden Hall of Edicts, cultivators could receive edicts with just a good deeds book, and exchange it for the corresponding treasures. The rules had also become more detailed than before. In fact, at this stage, even if external enemies came, it would be difficult to destroy the good deeds method. As long as they had a few hundred more years, everything would be completely stable. Elder Peng nodded his head. He focused his mind and unfolded the golden talisman. In an instant, a dazzling light flowed out from it. After that, everyone on the scene felt their senses go blank. They couldn't sense anything at all. They hurriedly followed Elder Peng's instructions and protected themselves. The light lasted for an unknown period of time, and finally faded away. When everyone looked again, the Yin God's spiritual cave was no longer there, and there was only an empty land in front of them. Chapter 1628. In most of the Yuhuan heavens, some sort of change happened at the same time. The turbid Yin spiritual vigor that was supposed to disappear appeared in the world again. Fortunately, the cultivators from all the realms had been informed beforehand and had prepared manpower to deal with the demon that might escape into the world. For this reason, Green Jade Palace had also sent out their disciples and elders to take care of every important boundary. Once they felt that something was wrong, those with high cultivation could immediately use the escape talisman that they had obtained from their karma points to send their subordinates to the Imperial Decree Golden Hall. There would be a pond of turbid cleansing to force the demon out. As for the small realms with little spiritual vigor, there was no need to care about them. The clear and turbid spiritual vigor corresponded with each other. If there was less clear qi, there would not be much turbid qi. This meant that there would not be a great demon like the heavenly demon appearing in those realms. Instead, there might be a genuine demon appearing in the 19 grand celestial poles. Fortunately, those realms were guarded by the Heavenly Lord. In the black flood heaven, Peng Xiang floated in the void. At this moment, there was a karma book in front of him. As he knew what it was, he felt that it was a little unbelievable. Now that Green Jade Palace was removing the seal on the spiritual cave of the Yin God, allowing it to return to the various realms of the Yuhuan heavens, it could be expected that the cultivators from all over the world would definitely take action to suppress the demon. As a genuine demon, he was naturally one of the enemies. However, he did not expect that he would be able to obtain this item. He flipped through it and realized that not only was his name recorded in the book, but there was also a rather large number of karma points. After thinking about it, if there were no accidents, this should be the merit of alerting Green Jade Palace and informing them of the impending invasion of the spirit sky. With a thought, the number of karma points decreased a little, but a talisman appeared in his hand. This meant that not only could he obtain karma points, but he could also exchange it for various items that were beneficial to him, just like the cultivators. Obviously, This method of obtaining karma points did not ask about one's background, but what one's inclination was and where one's heart was. Perhaps if he fell into the side of the demon again, this karma book might disappear. This caused him to feel extremely apprehensive in his heart. Probably only the palace master of Jade Palace was capable of silently controlling all of this from the shadows. However, he also saw a lot of benefits from it. If a genuine demon wanted to strengthen itself, it had to devour its own kind and absorb the souls of practitioners. With the karma book, it could not only grasp the news of its own kind, but it could also use the karma points to exchange for more magic treasures and supernatural powers. It did not even need to fight against practitioners, which was undoubtedly more advantageous than before. If he could reveal himself in front of others, it would be more convenient for him to carry out his plan. In fact, it was not impossible, especially since he had the meager karma points. With the endorsement of the Palace Master of Azure Jade Palace and the previous warning, as long as he planned properly, there was still a chance of success. Zhang Yan walked into the depths of the cave in the sealed land of Yihai Tian. However, he soon sensed that this place wasn't simple. If it was a normal world, he would only need a single thought to reach the end. However, he could only follow the rules here. It wasn't that the restrictions here could trap him, but if he didn't follow the rules of this place, he might not be able to reach the place he wanted to go. As he gradually walked deeper in, he gradually noticed that the ground beneath his feet seemed to be slightly incompatible with the world around him. If there wasn't an invisible force suppressing him, then he might be pushed out at any moment. He carefully sensed for a long time. If, on the surface, this cave seemed to exist in the leaf sea sky, but in reality, it should have been moved from another realm and then placed here. In other words, this place was actually an existence similar to a half-world. It was no wonder that people without a token would not be able to enter this place. Without the correct way to enter and exit, how could one travel from Yihai Tian to this place? He thought to himself, since it's a sealed land, there must be something that's trapped here. I wonder what it is that's worth all this trouble. Even though there was a restriction, it only delayed his footsteps slightly. After the sun rose and the moon set twice in the outside world, he arrived in a secret room. When he looked ahead, he saw a sacrificial altar there, and there was a stream of clear spring water flowing down from it and ceaselessly pouring into a glazed lotus cup. The lotus was green in color and completely translucent with jade beads falling from its petals from time to time, and it seemed to be full of vitality. On the other hand, there was a bright and lustrous jade bead floating in midair above the cup. With a glance, Zhang Yan recognized that the thing trapped in the cup was a wisp of essence qi. From time to time, it would transform into a winged white fish that flew here and there. It was not difficult to tell from its appearance that the original owner was not a human cultivator, but a demon. Moreover, it was a fellow cultivator, but it should have died a long time ago. As the white fish had a graceful posture and the appearance of a fish dragon, he could not help but think of Ao Shao. There were rumors that the dragon monarch was the mount of an almighty cultivator in the past. Could there be a connection between the two? However, when he thought about it again, an Enlightenment Realm cultivator could not become a true Yang mount. However, if it was just a wisp of remnant essence qi, there was a slight possibility. He walked closer and looked at it again. At this moment, he understood. The reason why the strange creature was imprisoned on the ground was to use its energy to nurture the glazed lotus cup. The strange creature's ability was not weak. This place had been here for at least 1,000,000 years. That strand of spiritual vigor had been eroded for such a long time, but it still did not dissipate. At this moment, he looked around and saw a golden patterned talisman on the stone table beside him. He raised his hand to take a look and saw that there was also a wisp of the beast's qi dynamic on it. However, he did not know why it was placed here. After focusing his attention for a moment and examining it repeatedly, he finally understood what it was used for. This wisp of essence qi had actually been refined into one with the talisman. If it was thrown out, it could transform the place where one's qi dynamic was located into this beast's qi dynamic. Thinking about the fact that Yi Haitian was the place where the great underworld patriarch had stayed for the longest time. Later on, there were people like Reverend Sun Yu who came here one after another. He guessed that this talisman might have been left by the patriarch for the later generations of disciples to protect themselves. Although the method was simple, it was actually very useful when he thought about it carefully. True young cultivators could avoid each other. After coming into contact with each other and realizing that the person they were looking for was not the person they were looking for, they would not come looking for trouble for no reason. He pondered for a moment. This jade lotus was very likely set up by the patriarch. Since the jade pearl's essence chi had not been exhausted, it meant that it was not completed yet. In that case, there was no need to touch it. Hence, he flicked his sleeves and only picked up the talisman. He had other considerations for this item. Since it could be used to hide from enemies, it might also be able to attract people who had a relationship with him. Even if it was a battle, it was better than searching for Tao alone. After doing this, he sensed again and found that there was another door behind the stone wall. Obviously, he had not reached the end of the path. Hence, he walked over and passed through the door. In front of him was a magnificent giant tablet. Its surface was smooth and bright enough to reflect one's reflection. It was tens of thousands of feet tall. He looked up for a moment and reached out to grab it. It became smaller and smaller until it finally flew into his palm like a seal. He sent his thoughts into it and found out that this item was called the Essence Reflecting Essence Connecting Truth Tablet. If it was used to stay in the void, it could stabilize the essence of the world and gather the essence of the void. Although a true young cultivator could move the void according to their will, they would not benefit others if it was beneficial to themselves. If they did not restrain themselves, they would be suspected of using too much power. If they had the help of this treasure, they could reverse this change to a certain extent. The truth-connecting tablet itself did not have this ability. All the Wei still came from the body of a true young cultivator. It was just that through a mysterious change, it could achieve this goal just now. Zhang Yan sensed that there was a strand of qi within it. He wiped it away and tried to comb through it again. He found that it was easy and the qi was not deep. It seemed that the previous owner had not completely refined it. From this, it could be seen that this was not left behind by the great underworld patriarch. It belonged to the previous owner of the essence qi. Perhaps it was not even the first owner. Nowadays, there were very few items that could bear the burden of his thoughts. This item probably had some history. Hence, he turned his wrist and put it away. At this moment, he suddenly sensed something and looked in a direction. In the Binling sky, a spiritual boat appeared silently, and there were a few cultivators in cloaks standing in the void. Their robes fluttered in the wind, making them look like monsters baring their fangs and brandishing their claws. One of the cultivators wearing a golden crown sensed for a moment and revealed a surprised expression. He said, "What the sect is talking about should be this void space. Strange, this world is so rich in spirit qi. Why is there no one who has severed their mortal body?" Someone continued, "Senior brother, isn't this a good thing? There's no need to waste time talking to them. I can also do what the sect told me to do more smoothly." The cultivator with the golden crown looked around and said cautiously, "We need to be careful. Since the sect specifically told us not to cause trouble at this time, there must be a powerful person here that I don't know about." Behind him, a person with a loose shawl suddenly said coldly, "Senior brother, there are traces of demonic creatures wandering around here. It seems that everyone is poisoned. Should we find the owner?" "Everyone is poisoned?" The cultivator with the golden crown was a little surprised. He thought for a while and said, "This is a little strange. That demonic creature actually did not kill, so there might be something else behind it. As long as it doesn't come to provoke us, we don't need to do anything. Bring everyone up and clean the poison from their bodies. We'll leave as soon as possible." Everyone bowed and obeyed. In just a short time, these people used their great spiritual power to bring all the remaining cultivators in Binling Sky to the spiritual boat and left in a hurry. Zhang Yan did not make a move from the beginning to the end. He just watched quietly. These people should be sent by the demon that Fu Qingming mentioned. However, they did not trespass into the place where his qi activity was spread out. It was not his territory, so there was no need for him to make a move. Looking at his attitude, it seemed that he was taking the initiative to retreat and did not want to become enemies with him. However, if it was not for the matter of protecting Fu Qingming, there was indeed not much conflict between him and the Khanate demon for the time being. Moreover, he had yet to properly arrange the matters in his hands, and there were many aspects of his cultivation that he was unclear about. Now was not the time to go against him. However, he had a premonition that there would be a day when he would run into this person again. Chapter 1629. After Zhang Yan withdrew his gaze, he was about to leave this place, but he inadvertently glanced at it and saw that after the jade tablet was taken away, there was a black jade slip placed where it originally was. There were surging waves below it, and it looked majestic, but he clearly didn't see it just now. After sensing that there was nothing unusual, he stretched out his hand to grab it. However, before his magic power could come into contact with it, it automatically transformed into a strand of clear energy that flew into his palm and hovered there motionlessly. He silently sensed it, and a strange expression appeared in his eyes. Judging from its aura, it should have been left behind by the great underworld ancestral master. However, he was still unable to see the contents on it, as if it was separated by a layer of blurry things. This was because the thing mentioned on it had fallen into a certain shadow of the future, and it wasn't the right time to reveal it yet. However, it wasn't that there was no way for him to forcefully look at it. Besides waiting slowly, he could calculate the person or thing that would lead to it, and then use force to push it forward. If he succeeded, then perhaps the original 10,000 years could be shortened to 1,000 years. However, if he made a mistake in one of the steps here, then it might cause the shadow of the future to cease to exist. However, he had sufficient patience to wait. Moreover, it didn't seem to be an extremely urgent matter, so there was naturally no need to do that. He looked around once more and saw that there was nothing worthy of his attention here, so he walked out from the abode he'd come from. When he arrived outside, a thought flashed through his mind, and he appeared in the dual spirit sky. He said indifferently, "Where's Peng Xiang?" Not long after he spoke, a formless gust of wind swept over from all directions. When it arrived not far away, it slowly condensed into a Taoist, and he bowed respectfully and said, "Great Lord, Peng Xiang awaits your orders." Just now, when he saw that someone had come to the higher realm to abduct all the cultivators, he was about to make a move. However, at that time, he heard Zhang Yan's voice resounding in his mind, telling him not to act rashly, so he didn't reveal himself. His avatar had been here for many years, and although he didn't know that Zhang Yan had reached the true Yang realm, he couldn't help but feel that he was extremely small, like an ant facing the blue sky, powerless to resist. He felt like a candle flame under the wind that could be extinguished at any time. Standing in front of Zhang Yan, his mind was blank, and he couldn't think of anything else. Zhang Yan flicked his finger, and several rays of spiritual light flew over, turning into 3 golden chapters. He said, "Now that parallel spirit sky doesn't exist, the spiritual vigor here is flourishing, and it might attract monsters. You can protect it here and pass down this technique. If there are any outstanding disciples, you can bring them to Black Flood Sky after their cultivation is successful." This place was full of spiritual vigor, but the great cultivators had all been taken away. This could possibly lead to the invasion of the void mutants. After passing down the Dao technique, the people of the lower realm could think of a way to defend themselves. Moreover, true Yang cultivators of the same generation could find each other through their qi. Moreover, Spirit Sky had been infected by evil qi for a long time. If they were to sense it here, they could easily find the original owner. Since there was a possibility that they could find him in the future, this place actually had some use. Peng Xiang kept the 3 golden chapters, bowed and said, "I understand." Then he said, "May I ask, Great Lord, if those cultivators came again just now, what should we do?" Zhang Yan said, "After they leave this time, they won't come back." After taking care of him, he moved his consciousness and returned to the Sea of Vitality. With a shake of his sleeve, he released the Jianyuan Biaohual Yen True Steel. Seeing that he could bring this treasure here, he unconsciously nodded his head. He used his mana to sweep up the huge steel and threw it out. The steel disappeared in an instant. In his senses, it already existed in every world that was covered by chi activity. These days, he was also thinking about a problem. In the past, when his cultivation level was low, he could use treasures to help him when he fought with others. However, the true weapons could not help him much, and it was already good enough to be able to go around in a world. It was not as good as the treasures that appeared from his heart visualization, because the latter was formed by his chi and mana. It could be a threat to his peers. According to Fu Qingming, those Khanate demons occupied Bu Su Tian and obtained many items of creation. Among them, there might be treasures that were hard to find in the outside world that could be refined into treasures that could be used by true yang cultivators. If the other generation had this help, they would be even more difficult to deal with. In the future, if he wanted to fight with them, he needed to think of some methods to counteract this advantage. The first one was to reach the point where he could control his mana as he pleased. It was easy for true yang cultivators to release their thoughts, but it was difficult to restrain them. In particular, a little bit of distracting thoughts could cause the world to turn upside down. Not only could it not achieve its goal, it would also cause unnecessary waste of vitality. Although he had the sea of vitality behind him, and did not seem to care about this consumption, but after thinking about it, if all the vitality was used by him, the power of the same divine ability would not only increase by a few levels, but it would also not cause too much pointless damage. However, before he started to cultivate, he needed to solve a problem first. He turned his gaze and looked at a place. It was where his avatar was. It was sitting cross-legged somewhere in the evil realm. At this moment, it seemed to feel his gaze and looked up. As the avatar of a true yang cultivator, it also had to enjoy the benefits of all living things. Therefore, even if it did not go to those places that were full of spiritual vigor, it could still absorb the spiritual vigor from the various realms that were full of chi dynamic. This generation could fight with the real body mostly because of this. However, it had the ability that was close to true yang. If it was not restrained, it was very likely that it would reduce the spiritual vigor of a certain place and eventually become completely barren. This was not like the situation in the 9 continents, where after a long time, spiritual vigor could still be slowly produced, but it was completely unable to recover. Fortunately, this avatar of Zhang Yan was of one mind with him. It knew that this would result in bad consequences, so it had been restraining itself. These days, it did not carry out any cultivation, but waited for the real body to think of a solution. This was also one of the reasons why he did not cut it off. However, this matter had to be solved eventually. Since he let the avatar out, he should allow it to cultivate. He waved his sleeve, and a jade talisman floated out and appeared directly in the evil realm. The doppelganger took a look at the talisman and immediately knew what it was for. It was like putting a shackle on his body. It wouldn't do anything to him, nor would it restrict him. There was only one restriction, and that was if he crossed a certain limit in his cultivation, it would stop him. Without any hesitation, he stretched out his hand and allowed the talisman to enter his body. Then, he stood up and bowed to him before sitting down again. Zhang Yan nodded slightly. He turned his consciousness and landed in the Kun residence again. Then, he sat cross-legged and immersed his consciousness into the broken jade, preparing to deduce a method to restrain his chi dynamic. This time, after a year of seclusion, he came out from his meditation. It was not that he could not continue to deduce, but this kind of restraint had to be done step by step. Once he reached a certain realm, he would need to change to a new incantation. It could not be done in one go. For now, the incantations that he had created in the past year were enough. He planned to first deal with the demon in the smoke realm after he had made some progress, and then come back to continue this matter. He closed his eyes, but in the next moment, the chi dynamic that enveloped the heavens changed slightly. It was no longer as overbearing as before, and it was somewhat restrained. If a true yang cultivator wanted to cultivate a cultivation method, it would be similar to the internal refinement method used to enter this realm. It could be used in the divine will, and no matter what results were obtained, it would immediately reflect into the real world. This process would only take an instant, but it would consume a large amount of yuan qi. Although the primordial qi in the primordial qi sea could be used again after being used, it did not mean that it could be used infinitely. This was because the overflowing primordial qi would automatically transform into his mana. If he used too much, it would undoubtedly hinder the advancement of his cultivation. In fact, he was not satisfied with such a situation, because it meant that the growth of his mana had long been fixed. Although he had achieved a level that no one had ever achieved before, he still believed that there should be external objects that could make up for it. Otherwise, the later generations would never be able to surpass the former. Fu Qingming also would not say that those with a shallow foundation could slowly refine it in the future. If there were no accidents, those external objects should be in Busu Tian. He thought to himself, let's settle the troubles behind me first, then think about this matter. With this thought, he stood up and looked into the smoke realm, but all he saw was darkness. The sun, moon, and stars in it had become dim. Not only that, the spiritual opportunity of this realm was also lacking a lot. There was a black fog there, and there was a demon in it. It had 2 horns on its head, and it looked like a sheep or a horse. It looked bloated and fat, and its body expanded and contracted, as if it was swallowing the qi dynamic. He stretched out his hand and pointed in that direction. In an instant, there was a sword light that leaped into the realm. It turned out that the Qinghong sword pill could no longer bear his qi and mana. Therefore, at this moment, with a thought, it had completely turned into a heart sword. As long as he thought in his heart, it could go to any place where the qi dynamic could be sensed. But if there was a need, it could also turn back at any time. However, the moment the sword light slashed the demon, there was suddenly a strange light that fell and covered it. At the same time, endless qi of qi came from countless worlds and poured into its body, as if to forcefully protect it. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed, and he immediately knew that the real body behind him had made a move. It seemed that the incarnation of the qi dynamic did not fall here, but was deliberately placed here by the real body, or else it would not deliberately take care of it. He snorted coldly, and the sword light instantly pierced through hundreds of worlds, leaping into all the past and future, and cut off all the sources of qi. As the force that maintained it was gone, the demon was finally unable to survive, and it exploded into a ball of light with a bang and completely dissipated in the smoke realm. After a while, a grand voice sounded out, "Fellow Taoist, why did you destroy my clone for no reason?" Zhang Yan smiled faintly and replied, "The smoke realm is a world under my rule, but you've crossed the boundary." The voice fell silent, and it seemed to be considering. After a while, it replied, "In that case, I've offended you. The qi that dissipated will be my compensation." Chapter 1630. If the avatar of a true yang cultivator was killed, the qi of vitality would spread out. As long as the original body was still there and the attack was timely, it could still be retrieved. However, if the original body was dead, it would return to the void completely. The mighty person's words meant that he would not do it again. On the surface, it seemed that it was a compensation for invading the smoke world for no reason. However, Zhang Yan did not appreciate it. Most of the spiritual vigor of the demon was collected from the smoke world. The other party said it was generous, but in fact, he did not pay anything. However, he did not need to argue with the other party because it would lower his status. The voice saw that he did not speak again and took it as a tacit agreement. It did not say anything and quickly retreated as the qi dynamic dissipated. Zhang Yan, on the other hand, began to ponder in his heart. Although the incarnation could change into any appearance, normally, cultivators would not show themselves in such a strange appearance, because there was really no need for it. Moreover, there was a hint of filth in the aura. It was very likely that the original body was a demon that had attained the Tao. In Palace Master Fu's memory, those Khanate demons are hiding in Busu Tian and have never come out. It should not be this generation. However, I wonder if this one is related to it. He wasn't just randomly making connections. Cultivators who could cultivate to such a high realm all had their own history and heritage. There was no one who didn't have a foundation. According to Fu Qingming, the Zhou Huanyuan jade could only be found in Busu Tian. If it was not a mighty person or a powerful force, it was impossible to get it. From this point of view, there might be a connection between the two. However, the relationship should not be that deep. Otherwise, there was no need to come to the void primordial sea. Wouldn't it be better to hide in Busu Tian? Thinking of this, he turned his mind and came to the smoke world. Looking around, he noticed that the spiritual vigor here was severely damaged. Although there was some chi of vitality left, it was forcefully extracted. It would take a long time for it to return to heaven and earth. If he did not interfere and allowed it to evolve on its own, it would take millions of years for it to recover. Not only that, there was no vitality here. It was obvious that the demon's avatar had already exterminated it. From this point, it could be seen that the person behind it did not care about the living beings in this world. Such behavior was definitely not the right way. Zhang Yan pondered for a moment. To deal with such a character, it was necessary to know his background. After all, no one knew if he would advance in order to retreat. Who knew when he would come looking for trouble again? Even if he wasn't afraid, he still needed to investigate a little so that he could be prepared. Therefore, he stretched out his hand and grabbed a strand of chi dynamic. He tried to identify it and found that the person did not hide his chi dynamic at all. He must not understand the mystery here. As such, he immediately used the method that he got from the Patriarch's cave and tried to deduce it. Then, he tried to deduce the avatar's chi dynamic. He tried to deduce the avatar. After a while, he sensed that there was one place where the reaction was extremely strong, and there were dozens of places that were slightly weaker than it. The rest were scattered all over the place, and there were hundreds and thousands of them. Some of them were even fighting against each other. His eyes flashed. This was clearly what was mentioned in the jade slip. Due to his improper thoughts, he had manifested too many avatars and was unable to control them. Moreover, the most striking chi dynamic was infinitely close to the true yang realm. He thought in his heart. Based on this situation, this fellow of the same generation should have noticed that this clone of his had become extremely difficult to restrain, so he was secretly thinking of a way to eliminate it. Moreover, this demon that was being nurtured in the smoke world was probably a backup plan he had prepared. No wonder he had retreated so easily just now. It turned out that he had his own worries and didn't dare to rashly start a conflict with him. Actually, if one didn't have an extremely deep foundation, then when one noticed that one's avatar was difficult to restrain, the best method would be to sever one's emotions and walk the path of emotionlessness. But if one didn't know this method, then there was nothing he could do. He could only put out fires everywhere. Zhang Yan became slightly more vigilant when he saw this. This was also a reminder to him. If another avatar appeared, then he must not be too careless. Otherwise, there would be endless consequences. But when his chi dynamic reached the point where he could restrain it freely, he would be able to pass this hurdle. Based on the analysis of the current situation, this avatar of the same generation had seriously threatened the original body. It was very likely that he didn't know the mystery. However, even if his avatar was taken, he wouldn't die. He would just change to another consciousness. It was just that at that time, his thoughts would be even more chaotic, and it would be even more difficult to suppress the avatar. From the looks of it, this person didn't pose much of a threat to him for the time being. Especially after the avatar that he had been nurturing for an unknown period of time was destroyed, it would be even more difficult to resolve the predicament. He didn't know how many years he would have to be entangled with him. There was no need to clash with him now. After he could restrain his external chi dynamic, it wouldn't be too late to find him and discuss Tao with him. Thinking of this, he pointed at the sky, and a door similar to the 10,000 empty ring was raised above him. Then, in an instant, he retracted his consciousness. Somewhere in the void, in the sky beyond heaven, there was a dazzling brilliance flashing here. It was just that at this moment, it was a little uncertain. This was not because there was insufficient chi, but because there were too many impurities in it. A Daoran with drooping cheeks like a fan was sitting there. He had a golden lotus crown on his head, and he wore an extremely large yin-yang Taoist robe. At this moment, he was deep in thought. Just now, I've never seen that Yuan Zun before, and his qi dynamic is also very unfamiliar. However, there were indeed a few great gens who didn't cultivate in Busu heaven back then. It's just that I've clearly seen that boundary, and I didn't see any traces of my peers before. Forget it, it's not good to clash with him now. It's only 10,000 years, I can still afford to waste time. This time, I'll give in to him first. After I settle these troubles, it won't be too late to regain my face. After returning to Xianhong heaven, Zhang Yan tried to restrain his qi dynamic, and went to the skyscraping Dharma boat. The servants on the boat had not seen him for a long time, and they all came to kneel and kowtow. When Chu Zhao and Ren Ji heard the news, they also came to the steps to greet him. Zhang Yan called the two of them to stand up, and he looked at Ren Jing. After more than 500 years, the latter had already become a cave, and his years of nurturing in the past were not in vain. He nodded and said, Ren Ji, this time, I have a task for you to do. Ren Ji hurriedly bowed and said, I wonder if Shangzhen has any instructions for me. Zhang Yan said, there's a boundary outside of Yuhuan heaven that was previously ravaged by demons, and the people were plunged into misery and suffering. However, there's still some spiritual vigor left, and it will flourish in the future. This place can't be occupied by demons of other races for no reason, and needs someone to guard it. Are you willing to go? Ren Ji immediately replied loudly, I'm willing to go. If it was someone else who heard this, they might hesitate for a while. After all, Yuhuan heaven had the method of karma points, and it was too convenient for them to cultivate. Now that all the demons had been destroyed, how could a barren boundary compare to the freedom here? However, he was different. He was a straightforward person, and he believed that without Zhang Yan's guidance, he would not have today's cultivation experience. Regardless of this, if his master had something to do, as a disciple, how could he retreat because of his selfishness? Zhang Yan nodded and said, I've already planted a ring of boundary there, and it'll be easy to come and go. I'll allow you to bring people from Xianhong heaven. If there's any difficulty, you can also ask Jinren He for help. When Ren Ji heard this, he could not help but be shocked. He could not help but raise his head and said, Ring of boundary. This, could it be? He knew that the 10,000 empty ring of boundary was set up by the palace master of Green Jade Palace, and only true yang mighty figures could connect to the heavens. Didn't that mean that Zhang Yan's divine sense was no different from that of the palace master of Green Jade Palace? Chu Zhao's body trembled, and he said, Master should have already reached that step in refining dark stone. Fellow Ren, from now on, you'll have to address me respectfully. Ren Ji took a deep breath, bowed deeply again, and said, Disciple has been rude. These years, as his cultivation experience improved, his knowledge also broadened, but even with his temperament, he was still very excited. True yang cultivators could be regarded as the ruler of the myriad world, the Yuan Zun of the heavens, and they had the ability to destroy the heavens with a single thought. Such a person was actually standing in front of him, and it was someone he knew. How could he not be excited? Zhang Yan smiled and said, Go. Ren Ji bowed, and said solemnly, Disciple will not make a mistake. After he left, Zhang Yan turned and said to Chu Zhao, I have been here for a long time, and I am preparing to return. This skyscraper ship is useless to me, so I will leave it to you to look after. In the future, my disciples will come and take it back. Chu Zhao said, I will look after it for master. Zhang Yan nodded and waved his sleeve, dismissing him. After standing there for a moment, he turned his gaze and looked towards a world that he had passed by in the past. Yitong World, Jiehong Mountain. In a cave high up on the peak, Hua Yingling, dressed in a rolling river Dao robe, was sitting cross-legged in the cave to cultivate. That year, he was harmed by his fellow sect members and fell into a hopeless situation. But unintentionally, he encountered the two realms dial that Zhang Yan threw into the world. Because he saw that he was a talented person, Zhang Yan took him in as a disciple of Han Yuan. He used his power to change the root of his talent and taught him a Dao technique. Hua Yingling was a persevering person, and after being harmed, he learned of the dangers of the world. Because of this, he did not spread the news, and had no intention of condemning his fellow sect member. Instead, he pretended that nothing had happened and continued to cultivate. Now, hundreds of years had passed, and he had reached the third realm of Yuanying. More than 100 years ago, he became an elder. But he knew that the road of cultivation was long, and there was no time for him to slack off. Thus, he continued to cultivate. Just at this time, the 2 realms dial in front of the table suddenly moved. Then, a ray of spiritual light shot up, and a talisman floated out. Huang Ling was startled, and a look of joy appeared on his face. He quickly stood up from the praying mat and bowed to the dial. He asked carefully, "Is this Grandmaster?" A voice echoed in his ear. "Huang Ling, the Yitong world is not a place for you to cultivate. Keep this talisman well. If you can reach the elephant realm, you can use this talisman to go to the great world." Huang Ling put the talisman away. When the spiritual light faded, he bowed 3 times to the sky and said seriously, "Disciple understands. I will not disappoint Grandmaster." Zhang Yan retracted his gaze. Now that everything was settled, it was time for him to return to the mountain and sea realm. He looked up at a certain location in the vital sea, and after a moment, his heart thumped. Instantly, he sent a bit of his will, along with boundless vital energy, toward the mountain and sea realm. Chapter 1631. In the mountain and sea realm, where the 4 continents and 4 seas were located, dazzling beams of light rose up from the ground, pointing toward the stars in the sky. They were like veins that connected the land and the starry sky. If you stood on a vast plain at night and looked up into the sky, you would be able to see that the beams of light and the stars were connected vertically, and that there were even smaller horizontal beams of light intertwined with each other. They were dazzling, like a gorgeous web that stretched out into the sky. These items were not as simple as they appeared to be. Instead, they formed a crisscrossing formation. Not only could cultivators travel through it, it was also an extremely powerful defensive formation. More than 500 years ago, Zhang Yan had returned with the secret book he had obtained from the Patriarch's Immortal's cave. Because of that, the Qinsang school had recruited many disciples who were proficient in this Tao, as well as millions upon millions of people. Over the course of hundreds of years, they had slowly built up the massive heaven-encompassing hexing lock. The mountain and sea realm was now firmly shut. Cultivators who didn't have permission to leave, or didn't have a talisman with them, would have no chance of leaving. Naturally, it would be difficult for others of the same generation to enter. Even mortal metamorphosis cultivators would find it very difficult to break into the mountain and sea realm. In fact, they might not even be able to discover the location of the mountain and sea realm. Furthermore, the spell formation faced both outside and inside, making it 10 times more difficult for anyone who tried to leave. The only regret was that there was one less almighty expert to hold the fort. Northern Heaven Frigid Abyss. Dragon Abyss Marsh. Floating Heavenly Palace. In the upper extreme palace, Qi Yuntian sat there, flipping through a jade slip. He wore a xianhai robe, and his aura was like that of a tidal wave. Even the slightest movement of his body was enough to cause the surrounding ocean currents to roil. His apprentice, Chao Yusong, stood guard off to the side. Whenever there was a request, he would carefully examine it, and then send people out to give orders. Footsteps could be heard as an attendant entered, head bowed. When he reached the bottom of the stairs, he presented a jade box with both hands. "Taoist Master," he said, "a letter from the Yunshu realm." Chao Yusong picked it up, looked at it for a moment, then turned and said, "Honored Master, the Yunshu realm is requesting help. Should we summon all the elders for a meeting?" Qi Yuntian pondered for a while and said, "Just now a few decades ago, I had sent more people, and the situation would not have collapsed so quickly. This person is greedy and cowardly. He thinks that there are a lot of great cultivators in our realm, so he wants to borrow my power to resist the evil monsters. You can use the two-realm instrument to ask him. If there is nothing important, write a letter for me." Currently, the mountain and sea realm was the major world in the heavens. The Junchen realm was relatively stable, but because of the threat posed by the almighty being from the smoke realm, the 9 continents hadn't spent much effort there. But the Yunshu realm was different. It was constantly threatened by the evil monsters, and it could be said that the war had been going on for nearly 1,000 years. The 9 continents had sent out reinforcements 3 times, but in order to prevent the mountain and sea realm from being discovered by the evil monsters, they had sent people from the Junchen realm. Chao Yusong received the order and was about to make arrangements when he suddenly saw a palm-sized dragon flapping its wings and flying in from outside. Under its claws was a talisman with a clear flame. He recognized that it was a flying letter used by the sects of the 9 continents, so he took a few steps forward to receive it. Qi Yuntian didn't raise his head and asked, "Where did it come from?" Chao Yusong sent the dragon away, then opened it and looked at it. He turned back and said, "Honored Master, it was sent by Taoist Master Yuan. He said he sent some golden reed seeds from the abyss, as well as some jade treasures and other strange things." Qi Yuntian paused, put down the bamboo slip, then looked up and said, "Let me see it." When the talisman was in his hand, he looked at it and said, "The gift is quite heavy. This is to thank me for lending the purple pure external medicine to the spirit sect." After he achieved mortal metamorphosis, sect leader Qin didn't show his face much. He handed over all the affairs of the sect to Qi Yuntian, while he himself cultivated in the upper extreme hall. When he received the purple pure spiritual qi from Zhang Yan, he ordered Qi Yuntian to make arrangements. Because there were too many external medicines, it was difficult for Qi Yuntian to make the decision alone. For this matter, he called all the elders of the sect to discuss it. Everyone understood that the mountain and sea realm wasn't very stable. From what had happened to the Junchen realm and the Yunshu realm, it could be seen that there were too many enemies in the myriad heavens. Right now, the only thing they could do was increase the overall strength of the sects of the 9 continents. These external medicines were useless in their hands. In the end, they decided to divide the spiritual qi into 5 portions. One was for the disciples of the Xianyuan sect, one was for the use of the sect, and 2 were given to the Shaoqing sect and the other large sections. Only one was left for emergencies. Of course, these spiritual qi weren't given for free. If the sects had more in the future, they would return it. Not only that, but this time, they still owed the Qinsang sect a favor. This time, the spirit sect heard that the Qinsang school was building a void sea to be used as a place to worship reverend mortal metamorphosis. Therefore, they sent a great gift. Just as Qi Yuntian was thinking about how to reply, he heard a disciple on duty outside the hall report, "Hall Master, Reverend Zhu requests an audience." He looked up and said, "Is Zhu back? Call him in." Not long after, a tall and handsome young cultivator walked into the hall. He bowed and said, "Disciple pays his respects to Master." Qi Yuntian's expression showed some cautiousness, and he said, "How's the investigation going?" 300 years ago, a few meteorites came from outer space. One of them landed in the western desolate domain, one landed in the northern cold abyss, and the rest landed in the ocean. It was hard to find any trace of them. Qinsang School and the Shaoqing sect had sent people to investigate, but they realized that these meteorites were actually living things, and their qi dynamics were obscure. As they couldn't figure out what they were, and the formation lock had not been set up, they didn't touch them rashly. They only set up a restrictive formation around them. However, there was a sudden movement on the meteorites last month. As the eldest disciple, Guan Yingyue, was in seclusion, they sent Zhu Yi to investigate. Zhu Yi said, "Teacher, the qi dynamic on the extraterrestrial stones is in a mess. They look very anxious, as if something is about to break out of them. The current formation can still suppress it, but its momentum is fierce. I don't know how long it can last." Qi Yuntian was about to say something, but his expression suddenly changed. He stood up and looked up into the sky. It wasn't just him. In the mountain and sea realm, in the 4 seas and 4 oceans, from the northern cold abyss to the southern 500 continents, from the western desolate domain to the eastern wastelands, all cultivators who had reached a certain level of cultivation could feel a profound, majestic, and indescribable aura descending from outer space. Just as everyone looked up, a strange scene appeared between heaven and earth. An extremely bright light seemed to break through the walls of the heavens, shining from outside into the realm, from the land to the void, and in an instant, turned into a field of light. At the same time, boundless spiritual chi descended. Because it was so dense, it turned into sweet rain dew, which sprinkled light over the entire realm. The spiritual chi of the mountain and sea realm was already extremely rich, but now it was raised to another level. It didn't matter what level of cultivation they had reached, everyone felt as if their bodies had been cleansed. Whether it was the breathing of spiritual chi or the channeling of magical power, it all became much smoother. That was especially true of the cultivators who were in secluded meditation. They were shocked to find that their bodies were now filled with a vigorous life force. Their auras were much more vigorous, and some of them even successfully broke through. In addition, some cultivators found that the magical items they had been nurturing for a long time had gained sentience. They flew out uncontrollably, suspended in the sky, and emitted loud cries, as if they were cheering and jumping for joy. As for the spirit medicines that had been planted on the continents in the medicinal herb garden, they seemed to have experienced thousands of years in the blink of an eye. They grew at an insane rate, and it was impossible to say how many plant spirits had entered the Tao. Countless birds and beasts had benefited, and all of them had transformed into demons. As soon as they gained sentience, the first thing they did was prostrate themselves on the ground, not daring to move. In the various continents of the mountain and sea, the outsider tribes, who were still in a state of ignorance, all prostrated themselves to the heavens. At this moment, all living beings bowed their heads. At this moment, not only did the continents of the mountain and sea receive this blessing, but the barren earth and stars in the void were actually emitting dense mist. Spiritual chi was released, turning into clouds and rain, moistening the earth. It was also because of this that the stars in the sky shone brightly, and a bright Milky Way appeared in the daytime. Everyone was shocked and looked at it blankly. They did not know why such a scene appeared. Only some of the grand cultivators had vaguely guessed something, and all of them were excited. Zhu Yi was dumbfounded, and his face was filled with shock. He said, "Teacher, this is..." Qi Yuntian looked up, and his eyes were filled with emotion. He said, "If I'm not mistaken, this means that Hall Master Du Zhen has returned." Zhu Yi's body trembled, and he said in disbelief, "Hall Master Du Zhen, immortal Zhang? But this kind of momentum and supernatural power." As he spoke, suddenly there was a clear and melodious sound between heaven and earth. It was like the ringing of a bell, and it was accompanied by the sound of a drum. It was like the rumbling of thunder, and at the same time, the splendor became even brighter. Yuanji bursts out of the spiritual light, and the heaven and earth play a clear and mysterious sound. Qi Yuntian suddenly laughed and said, "You all know that the heaven and earth are about to change." Zhu Yi turned his eyes and said in surprise, "Teacher." Ever since he became a disciple, he had never seen his teacher so happy. Qi Yuntian looked at the sky, and his fists that were hidden in his sleeves were clenched. He said, "From today onwards, the sects of the mountain and sea no longer need to fear the invasion of the outer world. The 10,000 worlds will be the land of the 9 continents' cultivators." Zhu Yi did not understand what he meant, but he could hear the excitement in his voice. He could not help but feel that the return of this Zhang Shangzhen would bring about some great changes. He looked around and noticed that there were beams of grand light shooting into the sky from all directions. The great cultivators of the world had all come out of their cave dwellings after sensing the great commotion. They were all shining brightly as they stood in the void and watched the wondrous scene unfold before them. However, at this moment, an even more shocking scene appeared. A giant hand gently reached into the inner realm, and with a wave, the sky above was pushed to the side. Then a handsome Taoist in a black robe slowly walked in from the void. His back reflected the 5 colors and his sleeves fluttered in the wind. Chapter 1632. As soon as Zhang Yan entered the radiant light continent, he flew down into the sky, his aura shaking heaven and earth. Currently, he was only a projection of his will. What everyone saw was a projection of his will, which meant that he was still floating above the sea of vital energy, in the realm beyond heaven, which was illuminated by the flames of the sun. Because his aura shone directly into the mind, it wasn't just the people who had come to greet him. All living beings, no matter where they were, would be able to see him clearly, even if they were far off in the distance. As he looked around, he saw that the grand cultivators of the various sects and clans had arrived. In addition to the people from the heavens paradise, standing in front of them were the grand cultivators who had shed their mortal bodies. When he had left the mountain and sea realm, only sect leader Qin, Yu Xianshao, Xue Dingyuan, Meng Zhida, and Ing Chuanxiu had reached the root fruit, and had shed their mortal bodies. But now there were a few more. He looked at them one by one. The Qingzang sect had the most people with the addition of Qi Yuntian, Shen Baishuang, and Sun Zhiyan, while the Shaoqing sect had the addition of Qing Qinzi and Yu Shirong. The 6 sects of the Ling sect seemed to have fewer people, with only Yuan Hongyang standing. Suddenly, he realized that some of his acquaintances were still in secluded meditation. However, it seemed that the timing of his return was perfect, and that the results would be coming soon. He smiled, flicked his sleeve, and then floated down from the sky. It was at this point that all of the land masses in the mountain and sea realm descended to the mountaintops. Hundreds of beasts lay on the ground, claws and fangs curled up. All of them seemed to be in complete stillness, as if they were prostrating themselves in worship. The cries of the beasts grew clearer and more melodious, which caused the surrounding cultivators to be shocked. Even if they didn't understand just now that they saw such a scene, everyone vaguely understood what was going on. However, no one said it out loud. All of them held their breaths in concentration as they watched him slowly walk over. The junior disciples on the ground were also excited, and their eyes were wide as they looked up. Zhang Yan arrived very quickly. Sect leader Qin was the first to step forward. Just as he was about to speak, Zhang Yan stepped forward first. He cupped his hands and said seriously, "Sect leader Zhenren, disciple pays his respects." Sect master Qin was slightly startled. Then, he nodded happily and raised his hand to return the greeting. Hall master Du Zhen is too polite. As soon as the two of them greeted each other, the situation in the field slowed down. The cultivators all looked a bit more relaxed. It wasn't that they were worried about what Zhang Yan was up to. It was just that the pressure he was emanating was simply too intense. Everyone had the strange feeling that the entire mountain and sea realm was like a thin piece of paper compared to him, something he could easily rip apart. This was the effect brought about by the gap in their realms. It was not something that they could ignore even if they wanted to. Zhang Yan smiled, then turned to the side and cupped his hands in greeting. It hasn't been long since I became a true yang cultivator, so I can't control my aura as I please. I apologize for disturbing all of you, fellow Taoists. Although the adepts had already guessed as much, to hear him admit it personally left them shaken. They stared at him blankly for a moment, then just now, they realized that they had lost their composure, and quickly returned the greeting. Zhang Yan turned back to sect leader Qin and said, "Sect leader Zhenren and I agreed that if we succeeded, we might be able to invite that person from the smoke realm to come with us. Fortunately, we have not failed in our mission." He spoke clearly and without any concealment. When the adepts heard this, their expressions flickered, and some of their auras began to fluctuate, causing rumbling sounds to echo out. The disciples below did not know about this, but these upper cultivators always remembered that there was a mighty existence outside the mountains and seas who could devour the aura of a realm. They did not know that he would come here, and at that time, there would probably be no one. All these years, they had been building formations everywhere, constantly looking for places that could accommodate Taoist cultivators, and even the evil realm, all to guard against the arrival of this person. Now that they heard that he was no longer a threat, their minds felt lighter, as if they had gotten rid of some shackles. Zhang Yan nodded slightly. Those who knew about this back then were constantly under pressure and had to be on guard. In fact, it was also a kind of burden. If they could reconcile it, it would not be a problem, but if they did not handle it properly, it could very well become a mental obstacle. Although it was not a big deal to the upper cultivators, it would more or less hinder their cultivation. Now that they had let it go, there was no longer a problem. Meng Zhen took a step forward, cupped his hands in greeting and said, Hall Master Du Zhen has been back for a long time, and it is not convenient to talk here. Why don't we go back to the sect for a chat? Zhang Yan nodded and agreed. Yu Xianshao said with a smile, your sect has built the land of the Void Sea, so we should send some congratulatory gifts. Today, Hall Master Du Zhen of your sect has returned, and I should congratulate you as well. The Void Sea. Zhang Yan looked towards a boundary and saw that there was a Qi Sea floating in the sky. There were islands on it, like pearls of white jade, or like silver chains. The concentration of aura was not weaker than the 3 halls, so he said, is it this place? Meng Zhen said, yes, it is. Hall Master Du Zhen has sent secret external medicine, and there have been a few more upper cultivators in the sect. Now, there is no shortage of external medicine, and with the guidance of the predecessors, I think there will be more juniors who will sever their mortal bodies in the future. The small world of the 3 halls was no longer sufficient, therefore, after a discussion with the other Zenrins, they used the method recorded in the secret manual to build a good place for Jinren Fan Tu to practice. Zhang Yan could understand this. Although the floating heavenly palace was left behind by the great underworld patriarch, with the aura of the 9 continents, there were already people in the sect who had entered the realm of mortal transformation. It was already amazing to have 1 or 2 spiritual masters, so the small world of the 3 halls was enough. But now, not including him, there were already 5 spiritual masters in the Qinsang school, and the aura in the small world was definitely not enough. Moreover, the sect was still expanding, so it was naturally necessary to build the Void Sea. Qi Yuntian asked for sect leader Qin's advice, then stood up and said, then, Hall Master Du Zhen and the other Taoists, please come to the Void Sea. Most of the cultivators present nodded. The mountain and sea realm had a great true Yang cultivator, which was a big deal. Not only should they congratulate them, but they should also announce it to all the realms. After exchanging a few more words, everyone invited each other. With Zhang Yan at the front, they all descended into the Void Sea. For a moment, the northern sky was filled with clear air, and tens of thousands of auspicious lights shone. Yuan Hongyang was a step behind. At this moment, he was thinking about something else. Because the aura in the Void Sea had increased, even the impure air in the murky Yin shield had increased. Also, because he controlled the sticks, he could feel that many more layers had opened up in the depths of the earth abyss. This meant that not only the sects of the Taoist sects, but even the 6 sects of the spiritual sects would have more people enter the realm of mortal transformation. Just now, he could see that Zhang Yan alone had the power to change heaven and earth. He knew that the situation inside and outside of the mountain and sea realm was going to change dramatically. The mountain and sea realm didn't have much to worry about. Ever since the 9 continents calamity, the sects had been led by the Shaoqing and Qinsang sections. As the Qinsang school grew more and more powerful, the Shaoqing school gradually took second place. However, the cultivators of the Shaoqing school didn't care about that, and the other sects tacitly agreed to it. However, under the prosperity, it could not cover up the fact that the sects of the 9 continents were slightly weaker. They could only barely protect themselves and were unable to advance. Therefore, most of the time, they still adopted a conservative strategy. However, with the return of Zhang Yanqing's true Yang, all of this would change. Because with such a powerful expert, the 9 continents would no longer have to fear the outer space. As he pondered this, Shui Dingyuan's voice rang out. Sect leader Yuan, what are you thinking about? Yuan Hongyang looked up and said, I was thinking that the 9 continents are truly fortunate to have Taoist Master Zhang become a true Yang cultivator. The Void Sea is vast, and the Void Sea is vast. The 6 sects of the spiritual sects shouldn't be confined to a corner of the mountain and sea realm. With that, he looked off into the distance. Sect leader Shui, he added, have you ever thought that this day would come when you followed the Taoist Master Shui? Shui Dingyuan thought about it and shook his head. But he was also deeply moved. As a Taoist master mortal metamorphosis, even if he hadn't reached such a level, he could still feel the grand Weili power from Zhang Yan. Even the smoky lawn cultivator who forced Kong Yin to flee was easily moved by him. At this level, he really couldn't think of any way to fight against him. But because of this, he felt inexplicably carefree. Looking ahead, he saw that the light of the sun and the moon was very different from before. He couldn't help but smile. Sect leader Yuan, let's go. Don't let our fellow Taoists wait too long. Yuan Hongyang nodded. His body turned into a rolling rainbow and flew toward Lu Yu above the void sea. 100 nations of the eastern wilderness, Boda City. Almost 1,000 years had passed. It turned out that Gong Xian Zhao and the others had either retired or died. Now, the great mystic scholar of the eastern wilderness, Gong Xingyue, was in charge of the situation. Just now, when the commotion came from beyond the sky, the great mystic scholars of the 100 nations, including him, were all shocked. They all floated into the air to see the cause of the situation. At the same time, they also knew the reason. He was extremely shocked. Suppressing the fear that came from the depths of his heart, he said, "So it's that Hall Master Duzhen of the Qinsang school who has climbed to the supreme realm and returned from beyond the sky. I didn't expect there to be such a mighty person in this world. I'm fortunate to see him in this life. My cultivation was not in vain." The surrounding great mystic scholars all stood there silently. When Zhang Yan entered the realm, the scene of heaven and earth speaking in unison and the people bowing down to him shocked them too much. A great mystic scholar came to Gong Xingyue and said softly, "Gong Yuji, should we prepare some congratulatory gifts?" Gong Xingyue said matter-of-factly, "Of course. Go back and discuss with a few palace masters. Bring a rule for me to look over." Before he finished speaking, someone suddenly exclaimed, "Palace Master Quan Chang, what are you doing?" Gong Xingyue turned around and saw an old palace master raising his palm, as if he was about to slap down. However, he was stopped by the people beside him. However, the blood qi in the sky collided and dyed half the sky red, causing the people in the city below to panic. He frowned and asked, "Gong Quan Chang, what are you doing? Do you not want your life anymore?" That old palace master's expression was filled with sorrow and pain. He pointed at the sky and said hoarsely, "Moon's sacrifice, we have cultivated for thousands of years. However, we are no different from ants in front of this mighty person. Then, what is the point of our cultivation in this lifetime? Why don't we just end it here?" Gong Xingyue's heart shook. He could understand these words. Under such Weili, everything seemed to become meaningless. Because no matter what you did, no matter how hard you worked, it could be easily changed or even destroyed. Then, what was the purpose of everyone's existence? Just now at that moment, even he almost lost his composure. It was no wonder that this person would suspect him. He could feel that in just an instant, Gong Shi's qi and blood had deteriorated. He wanted to say something but couldn't. In the end, he sighed and said to the people around him, "Help him out and take good care of him." Chapter 1633. Desolate western sky, cloud-filled continent, desolate Thunder Mountain. On the vast land, there was a pool of lightning. Within a radius of several square miles, lightning could be seen leaping and swimming, and there were even creatures born from the lightning in the pool. Amidst the flashes of lightning and the rumbling of thunder, there was a huge floating island floating in the air, and there were countless flying islands circling around it. Every inch of the island, from the small grains of sand to the large stone walls and mountain peaks, was densely packed with carvings of exorcism talisman. The carvings intertwined with each other and flickered with a faint spiritual light. In the sky, there was a huge circle of golden light, shaped like a ring. It seemed to be one, but it also seemed to be millions. It flickered and trembled, changing in size and moving up and down. It was obvious that it was an extremely powerful spell formation. This was the location of the Inata temple when they came to the mountain and sea realm. The highest point of the temple was still called Exorcism. At each of the four corners of the island, there was a 300 m long stone tablet carved with a pishio on the ground, and there were people standing guard at every direction. At this moment, there were a few tens of disciples floating in midair, and they would occasionally discuss in low voices or look into the distance, but the excitement on their faces couldn't be concealed. When one of the cultivators looked to the north, his eyes were filled with reverence. He murmured, "Qi flows through the sky, and all living beings worship him." Senior brothers, what do you think this Xianyuan supreme being is at? Could he be at the third level of the mortal metamorphosis realm? Everyone shook their heads. Most of them were only at the core transformation stage. Although they had some status in the Inata temple, how could they speculate about such a great cultivator? Someone said, no matter what, with Xianyuan Shangzhen's magic power, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he is omnipotent. No wonder there were rumors that he was the strongest among all the sections. The surrounding people all nodded their heads in agreement. Everyone present had ancestors from the 9 continents. However, they had all begun their cultivation in the mountain and sea realm, and had heard stories of how the mountain and sea realm had been conquered and conquered. Of those stories, Zhang Yan had been mentioned the most. However, none of them had ever seen him in person. Just now, they knew that he was even more powerful than the rumors made him out to be. Someone suddenly said, "I heard that Shangzhen Xianyuan has a good relationship with our Huanzhen temple. He has come to visit the headmaster several times." A well-built cultivator in the crowd replied, "Of course. Don't you know that Lord Xianyuan is the elder brother of the sect master?" "What? Senior brother Jean, aren't you joking?" All who heard this were astonished. Senior martial brother Jean sternly said, "How can this be a joke? I heard it from Elder Kong himself." Kong Shutong was one of the 2 elders in the sect. Like the headmaster, he was also in the Grotto Heaven realm, so his words couldn't be faked. Someone said excitedly, "I didn't expect our Huanzhen temple to have such a relationship with the Xianyuan branch of the Qinsang school. Doesn't this mean that our Huanzhen temple doesn't have to fear anywhere?" Senior martial brother Jean frowned and scolded, "Watch your words. Our Huanzhen temple is our Huanzhen temple, and Qinsang school is Qinsang school. As cultivators, if we are reduced to relying on others to strengthen ourselves, what can we achieve?" The person who was scolded also realized that he was wrong. He unconsciously felt ashamed and said, "I misspoke." At this time, on a floating island high up in the mountain, Kong Shutong and another elder with the surname Tsang were sitting on a jade platform. The 2 of them were observing everyone's words and actions. At this moment, there was a look of admiration in Kong Shutong's eyes. He said, "This Jin Shanglu is worth cultivating." Elder Tsang stroked his beard and thought for a moment. He said, "He is a disciple of Elder Ping's branch. He is indeed worth cultivating." At the same time, he shook his head. "Our Huanzhen temple has always taken on the responsibility of subduing demons. This is closely related to our cultivation. Now that we have lost our greatest opponent, it is inevitable that some of our disciples are unsteady. However, this matter is difficult to solve. We can only wait for the headmaster to come out of seclusion." Ever since the sects of the 9 continents arrived in the mountain and sea realm, because of the 6 sects of the spiritual gate keeping watch over the abyss, few demons could escape. Furthermore, the spiritual gate itself had completely turned into an ally. The divine abilities and Taoist techniques of the Huanzhen temple that were used to subdue demons were temporarily useless. As a result, some of the disciples who practiced demon-subduing techniques were inevitably at a loss. Kong Shutong also nodded. He said, "The reverend sect leader's talent is extraordinary. If not for the fact that he needs to strengthen his foundation, I'm afraid he would be able to take that step. When that time comes, it should not be difficult to regulate the techniques of our temple and get rid of the disadvantages." Elder Tsang smiled. However, after the reverend sect leader comes out of seclusion, if he can go to Hall Master Zhang and ask for some advice, I think there is a 90% chance of success. Kong Shutong also smiled. As the reverend heavenly abode, just now, when his mind was being illuminated, he also heard some of the words said. He also knew that Zhang Yan had become a true yang cultivator. Although he was not from the sect, there was nothing shameful about asking for advice from a true yang cultivator. This was an opportunity that others could not even dream of. He thought for a moment and said, "Speaking of this matter, the Qinsang School's Void Sea has been built, and Hall Master Zhang has returned from beyond the heavens. Although the Reverend Sect leader is not here, we should still send him a congratulatory gift." Elder Tsang thought for a moment and said, "Elder Kong is the most familiar with the restrictive formations in the sect, so he cannot leave for a moment. Let me handle this matter. In a few days, I will personally go to the Dragon Abyss Sea Marsh." Yutsang Sect's Su Ocean had a total of 16 islands. However, they had just been built and there wasn't a mortal slew true cultivator here yet, so they didn't have an official name yet. The place where Zhang Yan and his fellow Taoists were at was precisely the largest island. Meanwhile, all of them were here. The sky was covered in auspicious clouds, auspicious mists swirling about, golden multicolored lights scattering about, as if it was a paradise on earth. After Zhang Yan received the congratulations of everyone, he briefly spoke of his experiences in the past few hundreds of years, and his words were mostly related to the matters of the universe. Never had he imagined that there was actually such a vast universe beyond the universe, and everyone couldn't help but be fascinated as they listened, and they instantly felt as if the world before their eyes had suddenly become much wider. After he finished, he spoke in a dialect, "The first thing I will do when I return is to build the Myriad Realms Heavenly Gate, so that I can freely travel between different realms." No one objected to this and all agreed. Just now, they had also heard about the 10,000 emptiness ring in the Yuhuan heavens. With it, they could avoid the pain of crossing the void's primal sea, which was beneficial to all the sections. As for the method of karma points, Zhang Yan did not explain it in detail. There must be some hidden danger, so no one mentioned it. Ing Chuanxiu thought for a moment and said, "Temple Master Zhang, how is the Qinghua Heaven's spiritual qi compared to the mountain and sea realm?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "The spiritual qi of the mountain and sea realm is one of the best among the heavenly realms. The Qinghua Heaven's spiritual qi is not much better than the mountain and sea realm. When I returned to the mountain and sea realm this time, I brought along a huge amount of spiritual qi. The abundance of spiritual qi now surpasses all the other realms I have seen." With the origin appraisal tablet in hand, and his own ability, he could now mobilize spiritual qi from other realms. There was only one problem. The spiritual qi of the myriad realms was limited. If there was more here, there would be less elsewhere. However, the spiritual qi he took this time was from the other realms. Even if there were Taoist cultivators in those realms, it would not be a problem. Hearing this, the spiritual qi of the 9 continents was excited. After the upheaval of the 9 continents, they all understood that they could not take spiritual qi without restraint. Because of the Xiang and Fan 2 Taoist achievements in the past few hundred years, the sects had been discussing how to suppress the number of grand cultivators within a certain range. However, with Zhang Yan's arrival, this was no longer a problem. It was not only because of the increase in the qi of the realm, but also because there were other realms where people could be settled. In the past, they could do this, but they also had to be on guard against enemies from the outer realms. Now, they did not have to worry about that. Xue Dingyuan sighed and said, "It's a pity that the spiritual qi of the myriad realms has its limits." Then, he smiled and said, "But this is not what we need to worry about now." Zhang Yan smiled slightly. For the spiritual qi of the realms, this might be a matter in the distant future, but for him, it was something that must be considered. If the spiritual qi in his subordinates was exhausted, where should he go to get it? There was a way. If he did not care about his own damage and channel qi from the qi of vitality, it would not be difficult to recover. However, this method could only be done occasionally, but it could not be done for a long time. There might be a way to truly make the myriad realms prosper together. This was the inspiration he got from the things left behind in the Ancestral Master's cave. The Ancestral Master could extract the qi of essence left behind by the true Yang demon cultivators to refine treasures. If he could capture a true Yang great demon, such as those Khanate demons, he might be able to do the same. Of course, this was only his current thought. Whether it could be done was still unknown. The best way was to go to Bushutian. According to Fu Qingming's words, that was a place with endless spiritual qi. At this time, Qingqinzi said, Palace Master Zhang said that the Smoke Realm demon has been taken away, but what about the Yunshu realm? Zhang Yan smiled and said, I have seen the matter of the Yunshu realm. There will not be any changes for a while, so we can ignore it for the time being. However, that evil monster has some background. This matter needs to be understood, so we can talk about it in detail with fellow Taoists in the future. Qingqinzi nodded and did not ask any more. As a Taoist cultivator, the most important thing was nothing more than the cultivation method of transcendence. People of the same Taoist could learn from each other and learn from each other, not to mention that there was a true Yang Almighty being here today. Therefore, after the business was settled, the spiritual masters all asked for advice. Zhang Yan also had the intention to improve the strength of the sects in the 9 continents. Because he knew that the enemy that he was going to deal with was not simple, the more strength he had, the more power he had to protect himself, so he answered them one by one. This discussion lasted for half a month, and everyone benefited a lot. Because they needed to digest what they had learned, and because they knew that Zhang Yan probably still had something to discuss with the people in the sect, everyone left one after another. Not long after, on the island, only the 5 spiritual masters from the Qinsang school were left. Meng Zhen bowed and said, Palace Master Duzhen seems to have something to say. Zhang Yan nodded and said, there are some things that I have to say after the mortal shedding, so it is not convenient to tell the fellow Taoists. It is enough for the fellow Taoists here to know.